Tonight, we're going to explore how ancient humans survived deadly blizzards when winter could erase the landscape in minutes and turn an ordinary journey into a struggle against cold, darkness, and exhaustion. You stand beneath a heavy grey sky somewhere in the deep prehistoric past. With no weather forecast glowing in your hand, no heated house waiting nearby, and no reassuring road sign pointing towards shelter. Snow begins to sweep across the ground in thin, white ribbons. The wind carries the dry scent of frozen earth and distant wood smoke. Somewhere beyond the whitening horizon, people are already making decisions that may determine who sees the next sunrise. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, you can share where in the world you are listening from, along with your local time. It is strangely comforting to imagine all those different rooms and quiet corners gathered around the same ancient winter. Now, dim the lights, and picture the temperature falling almost faster than your body can understand it. The first flakes seem harmless enough. They touch your hair, melt against exposed skin, and vanish. Then the wind strengthens, snow stops falling politely downward and begins moving sideways, filling the air until distance becomes difficult to judge. A hill that seemed close disappears. A familiar line of trees becomes a pale blur. Even your own footprints begin fading behind you. For ancient people, this loss of visibility is not simply inconvenient, it can become lethal. Human beings depend heavily on sight for navigation, especially across open country, and a severe snowstorm strips away the landmarks that normally organise the world. The horizon dissolves, shadows disappear, streams hide under fresh snow, cliffs and holes become difficult to detect. You may think you are walking straight while gradually drifting in a wide circle, which is a particularly irritating way for nature to demonstrate that confidence and direction are not always the same thing. Then there is the wind itself. Cold air is dangerous, but moving cold air steals heat far more rapidly from exposed skin. Your body is constantly producing warmth through metabolism, and normally a thin layer of warmer air forms close to the skin and clothing. Strong wind sweeps that layer away. The colder and faster the wind becomes, the harder your body must work simply to remain at a safe internal temperature. Records from much later cold weather societies confirm something prehistoric people would have understood through experience rather than written theory shelter. From wind can matter almost as much as the fire itself. A person standing in an exposed plain may suffer terribly while someone only a short distance away, crouched behind a rock face or dense stand of trees, experiences noticeably less heat loss. Ancient survival knowledge begins with details like this, learned not from textbooks but from repeated encounters with dangerous weather. Your fingers respond early. Blood vessels near the skin narrow as the body tries to protect the warmer organs deeper inside. Hands become stiff, toes lose sensation, the nose and ears begin to ache, fine tasks become increasingly difficult. A knot that normally takes moments becomes frustrating. Holding a stone tool becomes awkward. Fastening a hide covering suddenly requires concentration. This creates one of the cruel tricks of extreme cold. The colder you become, the less capable you are of performing the very tasks that might save you. Gathering fuel, repairing clothing, preparing food, or constructing shelter all demand coordination. Hypothermia gradually interferes with judgment as well. A badly chilled person may become confused or strangely calm at exactly the moment when urgent action is required. Ancient humans do not need a medical word for this process to recognize it. A group that survives many winters can notice patterns. Someone who begins stumbling, speaking oddly, or failing to respond normally is in trouble. Experience becomes a kind of unwritten medicine. People watch one another because self-awareness becomes less reliable as the cold deepens. Oddly enough, Snow itself is not always the greatest enemy. Air temperature, wind, wet clothing, and exhaustion can matter more. Dry snow may rest on fur or hide without immediately soaking through, while melting snow creates a different problem. Moisture conducts heat away from the body far more efficiently than trapped dry air. A person who sweats heavily while walking, then stops in bitter wind, can chill quickly. This means ancient winter survival requires a delicate balance. You need movement to generate warmth, but too much exertion can produce sweat. You need clothing wrapped closely enough to retain heat, yet not so tightly that circulation is restricted. You need shelter quickly, but panic can waste energy. Survival becomes less like dramatic heroism, and more like a long sequence of sensible choices, which is perhaps less exciting around a campfire, but considerably more useful. The landscape around you is now almost entirely white. Wind pushes loose snow across the surface in waves. Sound changes as well. Some noises become muffled by fresh snow. While sudden gusts roar across exposed ground, you hear the faint creak of leather or hide near your shoulder, the crunch beneath your feet, perhaps the distant cracking of a frozen branch. For a moment, it feels as though the world has narrowed to a few steps in every direction. That shrinking world changes human behavior. People must remain closer together. Wandering even a short distance can become risky. Children need watching. Tools can vanish beneath new snow almost instantly. A dropped object made of bone, wood, or stone may be difficult to recover once the storm covers it. One curious footnote of cold weather life is that snow blindness can become another threat when storms clear and bright sunlight reflects from broad white surfaces. Ancient humans living in snowy environments would have experienced the painful effects of intense glare. Later Arctic peoples famously developed narrow slit goggles from materials such as bone and wood, showing how deceptively dangerous reflected light can be. Whether much earlier prehistoric populations made similar devices from perishable materials remains uncertain. Scholars still argue whether some ancient human groups regularly occupied the coldest regions throughout severe winters, or moved away during the harshest months whenever possible. Archaeological sites provide traces of occupation, but interpreting exactly which season people used a particular location can be difficult. A hearth proves that people made fire, animal remains may suggest a season. Yet a single campsite does not always reveal whether a group endured months of deep winter or paused there during a shorter cold period. What is clear is that humans repeatedly entered environments where winter demanded extraordinary flexibility. Neanderthals lived across parts of Ice Age Europe and Western Asia during periods of severe climatic instability. Modern humans eventually spread through similarly demanding regions. Neither group possessed modern heating, synthetic insulation, or meteorological forecasting. Their survival depended on accumulated practical knowledge. You begin to understand that the blizzard itself is only part of the danger. Hunger weakens resistance to cold, fatigue makes mistakes more likely, injury slows movement, fear can scatter attention, darkness makes navigation harder. A storm gathers all these pressures together and compresses them into a few exhausting hours. And yet you are not imagining helpless people wandering blindly through snow. Ancient humans are observant, social, and technically capable. They understand their landscapes intimately. They know where rock overhangs stand, where trees grow thickly, where valleys funnel wind, and where animals seek protection. Knowledge stored in memory becomes something almost physical, as useful as a tool carried in the hand. The blizzard continues to thicken around you. Snow brushes your face like dry grains of sand. Your shoulders instinctively turn away from the wind, somewhere nearby. Another person gestures toward lower ground, and everyone moves closer together. No speech needs to be elaborate. The message is simple. Exposure cannot continue forever. The great advantage humans possess is not unusual strength or natural insulation. Compared with many cold-adapted animals, the human body seems almost comically underprepared. There is no dense fur coat, no thick layer of protective blubber, no convenient ability to curl into a snowbank and sleep until spring. Instead, humans compensate with attention, cooperation, memory, tools, and planning. Those qualities transform the storm from an impossible enemy into a problem that can sometimes be managed. The wind may still howl, fingers may still ache, and snow may still erase the path. But survival begins the moment people recognize danger early enough to act. In a prehistoric winter, wisdom is often quiet. It is the decision not to keep walking, the decision to stay together, the decision to protect warmth before warmth is gone. You stand beneath a sky that has not yet begun to snow, and this is precisely when survival becomes interesting. The storm is still somewhere beyond the horizon, invisible but not entirely silent. Long before the first heavy flakes arrive, the world begins to change in small ways. The wind shifts against your cheek, clouds thicken in layers, birds alter their movement, herd animals become restless or drift towards sheltered ground to someone unfamiliar with the landscape. These details may seem meaningless. To people who spend their lives outdoors, they can form a language. Ancient humans do not possess weather instruments, but they possess something that can be nearly as useful in familiar territory repeated observation. You grow up watching seasons move across the same valleys, rivers, ridges, and plains. You learn which winds usually bring snow, which cloud shapes arrive before prolonged storms, and which sudden temperature changes deserve attention. Knowledge is stored in memory and repeated through conversation, demonstration, and habit. It is not perfect prediction, but perfection is not required. Sometimes a few hours of warning are enough. The air itself may offer an early clue. Imagine a mild winter afternoon becoming strangely still. The scent of damp soil fades, and a sharper cold settles over exposed skin. Then the breeze begins arriving from a direction associated with previous storms. You cannot measure atmospheric pressure, but you can notice what pressure changes due to the weather around you. A darkening western sky, a strengthening wind, and moisture gathering in the air can create a recognizable sequence. Clouds matter enormously. People living outdoors watch the sky because the pure of the sky controls almost everything. Thin high clouds may spread gradually before a larger weather system. Lower clouds can thicken until distant hills disappear beneath them. A halo around the sun or moon can sometimes appear when Arctic ice crystals fill high clouds, occasionally preceding worsening weather. Such signs are not guarantees. Of course, nature has never signed a contract promising to behave consistently, which is rather inconsiderate when your evening plans depend on not freezing. You also notice animals. Large grazing animals often respond to changes in wind, snow, and pressure by adjusting where they feed or rest. Herds may move toward valleys, forest edges, or other protected terrain. Birds can alter flight patterns or become less active before severe weather. Ancient hunters, already skilled at observing animal behavior, may have recognized unusual movements as one more clue that conditions were changing. A mainstream historical fact emerges from later traditional societies living in severe climates. Communities without modern forecasting often developed sophisticated systems for reading local weather through combinations of clouds, wind, animal behavior, sea conditions, and seasonal patterns. This does not prove that every prehistoric group used identical methods, but it shows how detailed environmental knowledge can develop wherever people depend directly on the outdoors. Experience turns ordinary observation into practical warning. You walk across open ground and feel tiny crystals of ice strike your face. The snow has not truly begun, yet the air carries a dry roughness, Your companions look toward a ridge where cloud has swallowed the upper slopes. No dramatic announcement follows. Someone simply changes direction. That quiet decision may matter more than any desperate struggle later. Good storm reading is not merely about predicting snow, it is about judging how quickly conditions could become dangerous. A light snowfall while camped near shelter is very different from the same snowfall while crossing exposed uplands late in the day. Ancient people must combine signs from the sky with knowledge of distance, terrain, daylight, and the condition of the group. Weather prediction becomes part of a larger calculation. Children, older adults, injured people, and heavily burdened travellers change that calculation. A route that one healthy hunter might complete quickly may take a mixed group much longer. If clouds are thickening and daylight is fading, the sensible choice may be to stop early. This can feel frustrating. The destination may be close, food may be waiting, pride may whisper that the group can continue. Pride, however, is famously poor insulation. The direction of smoke can offer another clue when a fire is already burning. A steady column suddenly bending sideways indicates a change in wind. Smoke that sinks or behaves differently near the ground may reflect changing atmospheric conditions, although interpretation depends heavily on local geography. People who maintain so fires daily naturally become sensitive to such details, even without naming the physical processes involved. The landscape itself can amplify warning signs. Wind striking a mountain range may produce distinctive clouds. Snow already lying on ridges may begin blowing in long, pale streamers before conditions worsen below. Forest canopies may start groaning as stronger gusts arrive overhead. On open plains, loose snow may begin racing along the ground while the sky is still partly visible. These are practical signs, impossible to ignore once you have experienced what can follow. Oddly enough, smell may occasionally play a role in how people sense changing weather. Humidity and wind direction can alter the way scents travel. Smoke from distant fires, vegetation, wet ground, or animals may suddenly seem stronger or weaker as air movement changes. A person who spends most days outside may notice these shifts almost subconsciously. A curious footnote here is that modern people often underestimate sensory information simply because buildings, roads, and machines surround us with constant background noise and artificial smells. Your ears become useful too. Distant wind can sometimes be heard in trees before it reaches the place where you stand. A forest may produce a low continuous rush, while exposed branches click and creak in colder gusts. Ice on a lake or river can boom and crack as temperatures change. None of these sounds individually announces a blizzard, but together with a darkening sky and falling temperature, they add weight to the decision to seek protection. No agreement has been reached on exactly how much prehistoric weather knowledge can be reconstructed from archaeology. The difficulty is obvious. Clouds leave no artifacts. A wise decision to abandon a hunting trip does not fossilize. Knowledge passed orally through generations vanishes unless it affects tools, settlement patterns, or other material remains. Scholars therefore have to infer behaviour indirectly, which leaves plenty of room for argument. Some researchers emphasise the intelligence required for long-term occupation of cold environments. If humans repeatedly lived in places with severe winters, they must have developed reliable strategies for recognising and responding to weather. Others caution against imagining an elaborate predictive system where simpler seasonal routines may have been enough. Perhaps many groups reduced risk by avoiding exposed regions at certain times rather than trying to interpret every approaching storm. Seasonal memory can be powerful even without practice forecasting. You know that a particular valley receives heavy snow after certain winds. You remember that a ridge becomes dangerous when cloud settles over it. You know which river crossing freezes early and which remains treacherous. This kind of knowledge accumulates over many lifetimes. Grandparents pass warnings to children. Hunting stories contain practical lessons. A tale about someone caught on open ground may quietly function as a weather manual. For a moment, your mind drifts into the rhythm of such a life. You wake and look at the sky before deciding where to travel. You touch the snow to judge its texture. You watch smoke. You notice birds. You study the edges of clouds while chewing a small piece of dried meat. Weather is not something checked briefly and forgotten. It accompanies every decision. The most important skill may be restraint. Recognizing danger means little if you ignore it. Ancient people who survive severe climates learn when not to travel, when to shorten a hunt, and when to return while visibility is still good. That may sound wonderfully sensible from the warmth of a bed, but real decisions are harder when food is scarce or a journey feels nearly complete. You feel another gust cross the plain, colder than the one before it. The clouds have thickened into a low grey ceiling, and animals in the distance are moving toward the broken terrain. Nobody needs to know the exact hour when snow will begin. Nobody needs to calculate wind speed. Enough signs are gathering to make the safest choice clear. In such moments, survival belongs to those who notice small changes before they become enormous ones. A darker sky, a different wind, an uneasy herd, a fading ridge. Each detail seems ordinary until combined with memory. Ancient humans endure not because they can command the weather, but because they learn to listen closely when the landscape begins offering warnings. You move toward broken ground where the landscape itself begins to offer protection. A dark line beneath a cliff looks far more inviting than the open plain, and even a shallow hollow in the rock can change the force of the wind around your body. For ancient humans, finding shelter does not always mean building something from scratch. Often the safest structure is already there, shaped by stone, earth, trees, and countless seasons of erosion. A cave can seem like the obvious answer. Thick rock blocks, wind, snow accumulates less deeply near some entrances, and the interior may remain noticeably more stable in temperature than exposed ground. Yet not every cave is useful. Some are damp, narrow, difficult to reach, or positioned directly where wind funnels through a valley. Others may already be occupied by animals that have very reasonable opinions about strangers arriving during a storm. Records from prehistoric sites confirm that humans used caves and rock shelters repeatedly across Europe, Western Asia, Africa, and other regions. Archaeologists find hearths, stone tools, animal bones, and layers of occupation beneath protected overhangs. These places are valuable because stone ceilings and sheltered floors can preserve traces of human activity for extraordinarily long periods, turning ancient refuge into a kind of accidental archive. Still, you should not picture every cave as a cozy underground home. Many were probably used temporarily. A shallow shelter may serve for a night, a hunting stop, a seasonal camp, or a refuge from bad weather. The usefulness of the place depends less on romance and more on practical details. Is the floor dry? Can smoke escape? Is there enough room for several people? Can you see approaching animals? Is there fuel nearby? You duck beneath a low rock overhang and immediately feel the difference. The gusts become softer. Snow still curls around the entrance, but the air against your face is calmer. That reduction in wind matters enormously because the body loses heat more slowly once moving air is blocked. Even without a fire, a suitable windbreak can improve survival conditions simply by reducing exposure. The best shelters often combine several advantages. A south-facing rock wall in a northern landscape may receive more winter sunlight. A site slightly above a valley floor may avoid pools of colder air that settle into low ground. Dense woodland can reduce wind speed, while nearby water and fuel make longer stays possible. Ancient people who know a territory well can remember which locations offer these combinations. Your hand brushes rough stone as you move deeper beneath the overhang. The rock is cold, but it does not whip heat away like open wind. The floor is uneven, scattered with dry leaves, fragments of bark, and old animal droppings. Someone begins clearing a place to sit. Another checks the ceiling for loose stone. Shelter is not simply discovered, it must be inspected. A curious footnote is that large caves can sometimes be colder than expected because cold air sinks and becomes trapped in lower chambers. Some even preserve ice deep into warmer seasons. A dramatic entrance does not guarantee comfort. A smaller rock shelter with good orientation may be more useful than an impressive cavern that feels like a stone refrigerator, which is hardly the luxury upgrade anyone requested. Cliffs can provide protection even when no cave exists. The sheltered side of a rock face can break the wind enough to create a surprisingly calm pocket of air. Boulders, ridges, and natural depressions work in similar ways. A group caught in severe weather may not need perfect shelter. They need enough shelter to slow heat loss, rest safely, and perhaps create a small protected fire. Terrain shapes wind in complicated ways. Valleys can either protect you or make conditions worse. A narrow gap may channel air like a funnel, increasing wind speed. A broad hollow surrounded by trees may be calmer. The difference can be felt within a few steps. Ancient travellers learn these patterns through experience, sometimes pleasantly, sometimes through the sort of lesson nobody wishes to repeat. You can imagine testing the ground almost instinctively. You crouch behind one boulder and feel snow still striking your shoulders. You move several paces toward another and notice that the gusts weaken. A simple choice between two nearby positions can produce dramatically different comfort. Knowledge of microclimates, tiny variations in conditions across a small area, becomes an important part of winter survival, even if no one has a technical term for it. Trees offer another form of natural shelter. Dense conifer branches can intercept snow and reduce wind near the ground. Fallen tall trunks create barriers. How tangled woodland forces air to move around obstacles rather than sweeping freely across the body. In forested regions, a carefully chosen stand of trees may provide more immediate protection than distant rock. But forests bring their own hazards. Heavy snow can break branches. Old trees may fall during violent wind. A spot directly beneath a loaded limb can be more dangerous than it appears. People familiar with winter woodland learn to notice which trees are stable and where snow has accumulated overhead. Survival often depends on seeing a shelter not as a single advantage, but as a collection of risks and benefits. Scholars bicker over how deliberately prehistoric groups selected certain cave locations for climate advantages rather than simply using places close to food, water, or travel routes. Some sites seem exceptionally well placed for protection and visibility, while others may reflect opportunity more than careful planning. Archaeological remains rarely explain the exact thought process behind choosing one shelter instead of another. There is also the question of repeated use. A good shelter may become part of a mental map shared across generations. People return because the location is known, because dry wood can sometimes be found nearby, because game animals pass through the same valley, or because previous visitors left useful materials. A familiar refuge reduces uncertainty, which becomes especially valuable when weather deteriorates. For a moment, it feels as though the cliff itself has become part of the group. Its broad stone face takes the wind while you remain tucked against the quieter side. Snow gathers in ridges beyond the shelter. Inside, people sit close together and examine the space with practical attention. The ceiling height, floor slope, smoke path, and entrance width all matter. Natural shelters also affect how much energy a group must spend. Building a substantial structure requires time, tools, and materials. A rock overhang provides walls and a roof immediately. That saved effort can be redirected toward gathering fuel, preparing food, drying clothing, or caring for someone who's chilled. In dangerous conditions, conserving labour can be as important as conserving heat. The smell inside the shelter changes once people settle. Damp stone mixes with hide, crushed vegetation, and old smoke trapped in cracks. Outside, wind continues to scrape snow across the entrance. Inside, movement slow, hands regain some usefulness. Conversation becomes easier because voices are no longer scattered by gusts. You begin to see the landscape differently. A cliff is no longer just geology. A hollow is not merely a depression. A stand of trees is not simply vegetation. Each feature can become part of a survival system when understood through long familiarity. Ancient humans do not conquer winter by standing defiantly in the open. They survive by noticing where the land already offers protection and making intelligent use of every quiet corner it provides. You kneel on frozen ground with materials scattered around you, and suddenly shelter becomes a problem of hands, weight, shape, and time. There is no convenient wall waiting nearby, so the protection must be made. Ancient humans facing severe winter weather rely on whatever the landscape provides, including branches, hides, bone, turf, brush, packed earth, and sometimes snow itself. The goal is not the architectural beauty. The goal is to stop moving air from carrying precious warmth away. The first decision concerns shape. A tall structure may offer room, but it also presents more surface to the wind. A low shelter is easier to stabilise and easier to warm with bodies and fire. You crouch while others drag branches into position, creating a frame that rises only enough for people to sit or lie beneath it. The roof slopes sharply so that snow and wind are less likely to press directly against a broad flat surface. Records confirm that prehistoric people built shelters from combinations of wood, animal materials, and earth in environments where caves were unavailable or inconvenient. Some Upper Paleolithic sites preserve patterns of post holes, hearths, and structural remains that suggest deliberate dwellings rather than casual heaps of brush. Archaeologists must reconstruct much from incomplete traces because hides, ropes, branches, and grasses usually decay long before stone tools and bones. You push one wooden pole into frozen soil and discover immediately why construction in winter is unpleasant. Hard ground resists digging, fingers stiffen quickly, and every movement requires effort. A shelter therefore benefits from clever anchoring rather than deep excavation. Heavy stones can pin down hides. Forked branches can lock poles together. Snow can be packed around the lower edges to block drafts. Wind is the main architect. Instead of placing the entrance wherever it looks convenient, you turn it away from the strongest gusts. The structure presents its lowest, toughest side toward the weather. Any opening is kept small because every doorway is also an invitation for warm air to escape. Ancient builders may not speak in terms of airflow, but years of experience teach the lesson perfectly well. A hide covering provides more than simple waterproofing: animal skin, especially when fur remains attached, traps tiny pockets of air that reduce heat transfer. Several hides overlapped across a wooden frame can create a remarkably effective barrier. The seams matter. If gaps are left open, wind finds them immediately, with the irritating persistence of someone searching for the only loose window in a house. You pull one hide across the frame and feel it snap in the gusts. Another person weighs the lower edge with stones. A third stuffs dry grass into a narrow gap near the ground. Construction becomes cooperative because large coverings are difficult to manage alone in strong wind. Even a small shelter demands coordinated effort, and the faster it rises, the less energy everyone spends exposed. Turf is another useful material where vegetation and soil can be cut or lifted in thick blocks. Dense pieces of earth laid against a structure add mass and insulation. They reduce drafts far better than a thin hide alone. In regions where wood is scarce, earth can become part of the wall itself, though gathering it from frozen ground is exhausting work. Bone can serve where suitable timber is limited. Large animal bones, including mammoth remains in some Ice Age regions, have been associated with structures interpreted as dwellings or frameworks. One scandalous aside in archaeological interpretation is that scholars have occasionally disagreed quite energetically about whether certain arrangements of mammoth bones represent intentional houses, ritual deposits, accumulated refuse, or mixtures of several activities. Ancient architecture rarely leaves a helpful label. The practical value of a strong framework is obvious. Thick bones resist compression and can support coverings, especially when combined with wood. Yet no sensible group would rely on enormous bones simply because they look impressive thousands of years later. What matters is what can be gathered locally and assembled efficiently. A shelter built from modest branches can be more useful than a grander structure that consumes too much time. Your palms begin to notice every texture. Bark feels rough and damp. Hide is stiff with the cold. Sinew bindings tighten as they dry. Stones are painfully cold to touch for long. Building shelter is a tactile process, and prehistoric craftspeople become familiar with which materials bend, crack, stretch, shrink, and hold under pressure. Bindings are crucial because a frame without secure joints can collapse under wind or snow. Strips of hide, sinew, plant fibre, or flexible roots may be wrapped around intersections. A simple lashing can turn several loose poles into a stable unit. The strength does not come from one perfect component, but from many parts sharing the load. Snow itself can help strengthen the walls. Packed against the outside of a low shelter, it blocks gaps and creates additional insulation to the cord as trapped air within snow reduces heat movement. This sounds strange only if you imagine snow as nothing but cold water. In reality, a thick layer can protect against colder moving air outside. Oddly enough, snow shelters work on the same basic principle that keeps many winter animals alive beneath drifts. Air trapped inside the snow creates a more stable environment than the exposed surface. Humans in different cold regions eventually learn to exploit this property directly. Whether particular prehistoric populations routinely built elaborate snow structures is much harder to establish because snow leaves almost nothing for archaeologists to excavate once spring arrives. Scholars bicker over how sophisticated some Paleolithic structures really were. Post holes and bone circles can support several reconstructions, and missing organic materials force researchers to infer roof height, wall thickness, and coverings. Some proposed dwellings may have been substantial seasonal homes, while others were probably temporary shelters the evidence tells you people built. It does not always tell you exactly what those buildings looked like. You become adding insulation from the inside. Dry grasses and brush can be packed between framework and covering. The purpose is not simply softness. Each layer slows the movement of warm air. A double wall with trapped vegetation may perform far better than one exposed skin. Even scraps matter because winter rewards small improvements. The floor deserves attention as well. Frozen ground drains heat relentlessly from a resting body. A shelter with excellent walls can still become miserable if everyone lies directly on cold earth. Branches, reeds, grasses, bark, and hides create separation from the ground. A thick bedding layer becomes part of the shelter rather than mere decoration. Size is another compromise. Too large, and the interior contains more cold air and requires more material. Too small, and movement becomes awkward, especially around tools, food, and children. A compact structure that fits the group closely can preserve warmth efficiently. Comfort is measured less by personal space and more by whether your feet remain warm. You listen as the wind presses against the completed wall. Instead of striking your face, it produces a dull flutter through layers of hide and brush. The structure shifts slightly but holds. Snow begins collecting along its outer base, sealing tiny gaps that hands missed. Inside, the air is still enough that your own warmth finally seems to remain near you. This is the quiet genius of prehistoric shelter building. No single material performs magic. Wood provides shape, bindings provide strength, hides block wind, grass traps air, stones add weight, earth and snow seal the lower edges. Each modest element compensates for weaknesses in the others, until the combined structure becomes much more effective than any piece alone. You settle beneath the low roof while the storm spends its force outside. The wall is imperfect, the floor uneven, and the ceiling close enough to touch, yet the difference is immense. Human survival in severe winter depends repeatedly on this ability to reshape a small patch of hostile landscape into a protected pocket where heat, tools, food, and people can remain together. You sit close to a small flame while the wind works uselessly against the walls, and the entire shelter seems to reorganize itself around that glow. Fire is not merely pleasant warmth, it is light, protection, cooking, drying, reassurance, and a way to transform frozen materials into usable ones. In severe winter, keeping a fire alive can become one of the most important responsibilities in camp, because relighting it from nothing may be far harder than feeding an ember that already exists. The first challenge is fuel. A storm may bury fallen branches beneath snow, soak exposed wood, and make travel dangerous. You cannot simply wander outside whenever the flames shrink. Ancient people therefore benefit from gathering more fuel than seems immediately necessary. Dry branches, bark, twigs, resinous wood, and other combustible material can be stored beneath shelter or covered before the weather worsens. A pile of firewood is not clutter, it is stored heat. Records confirm that prehistoric hearths were used repeatedly for cooking, warmth, light, and working materials. Archaeologists find charcoal, burned bone, reddened sediment, ash, and stones altered by heat at ancient occupation sites. These traces reveal that fire was not an occasional novelty in many communities. It was woven deeply into daily life and technical skill. You watch someone feed thin twigs into the centre of the hearth rather than dropping a heavy branch across the flames. The choice is deliberate. Small dry material catches quickly, while larger pieces burn longer once the fire is established. Managing a fire means balancing both. Too little fuel and it fades. Too much placed carelessly can smother the hottest part and leave everyone staring at a smoking pile with the quiet disappointment of people who have somehow managed to lose an argument with wood. Air matters just as much as fuel. Fire needs oxygen, but an open draft can send sparks through the shelter or pull valuable warmth away. The hearth must therefore sit where smoke can escape without allowing strong wind to rush directly through the living space. The position of an entrance, roof opening, or sheltered gap can determine whether the fire burns cleanly or fills the interior with choking smoke. Smoke is an unavoidable companion. Your eyes water when the wind shifts. The scent of resin, charred wood, singed hide, and cooked food settles into hair and clothing. A modern person might complain about the smell, but in prehistoric winter the fragrance of smoke is also the fragrance of security. It means there is heat available, food can be prepared, and darkness has been pushed a little farther away. A fire does not warm every part of a shelter equally. The side facing the flames may become comfortable while your back remains cool. People can reflect heat by arranging stones or placing the hearth near surfaces that absorb and release warmth. Although the effect varies with material and layout, warmed stones can also retain heat after flames decline, providing a gentler source of warmth. Heating stones introduces risk. Some stones contain moisture or fracture when exposed rapidly to intense heat. Experienced people learn which local rocks tolerate fire and which are best avoided. This knowledge may be extremely specific to a region. A perfectly ordinary stone near one river can behave very differently from another collected elsewhere. Oddly enough, fire can also help dry fuel that seems almost useless. Damp branches placed near, rather than directly in, the flames can gradually lose moisture. Bark can sometimes be peeled to expose drier wood beneath. Dead branches caught above the ground may remain less wet than material lying in snow. Winter firekeeping becomes a lesson in patient improvisation, where not all wood is equally miserable. The smallest glowing coal can matter enormously. Instead of allowing a fire to die completely overnight, people may preserve embers beneath ash or within a bed of coals. Ash slows cooling and reduces the amount of oxygen reaching the ember, allowing it to remain alive longer without consuming fuel quickly. In the morning, careful blowing and dry tinder can encourage that hidden glow back into flame. Your face moves close to the hearth while someone uncovers a patch of red beneath grey ash. A little dry material is added. Breath feeds the ember gently, smoke curls upward first. Then a narrow tongue of flame appears. The achievement looks modest, but it saves the effort and uncertainty of producing fire from scratch in freezing conditions. Producing fire intentionally requires suitable materials and practice technique. Depending on the place and period, humans could create sparks by striking appropriate minerals or use friction methods with dry wood. The exact methods available vary through prehistory, and preserving the archaeological evidence is difficult. What remains clear is that firemaking demands preparation. Tinder must be dry enough to catch, and the person using the technique must know exactly what to do. A curious footnote appears in the role of fungus. Certain dry fungi, fibrous plant materials, bark, and prepared organic substances can work as tinder or help transport a smouldering ember. A glowing material protected inside a container can potentially carry fire between locations without producing an open flame. It is the prehistoric equivalent of taking your heating system with you, except the heating system occasionally tries to set your belongings on fire. Scholars still argue whether all early human populations could make fire reliably whenever needed, or whether some groups depended heavily on preserving flames obtained from natural sources or existing hearths. Evidence for controlled fire extends deep into prehistory, but proving exactly when particular techniques of deliberate ignition became routine is far more difficult. Charcoal tells archaeologists that something burned does not politely explain who started it or how. Fire offers more than direct warmth. Cooking can make some foods easier to chew and digest, which becomes valuable when the body needs large amounts of energy. Heat can soften frozen meat, melt snow or ice, warm liquids, and thaw tools or bindings stiffened by cold. A single hearth therefore supports many survival tasks simultaneously. It also changes the rhythm of social life. People gather within the useful dual circle of light. Tools are repaired, food is divided, children can remain close to adults, stories and practical instructions can be shared while hands work. The hearth creates a focal point where knowledge moves between generations, especially during long hours when darkness limits travel. There are hazards. Naturally, a poorly placed flame can ignite hides. Dry grass, bedding, or wooden supports, sparks can damage valuable clothing, smoke can become dangerous in enclosed space, carbon-rich fumes from inefficient burning may accumulate where ventilation is poor, although ancient people would recognize the effects through experience rather than chemistry. You feel the heat against your palms and notice how carefully everyone respects the boundary around the hearth. Fuel sits within reach, but not close enough to catch accidentally. Bedding remains farther away. Children are kept from crawling into the dangerous centre. Fire is useful precisely because people learn to control it, and control depends on constant attention. Night deepens until the shelter exists as a small island of amber light. Beyond the walls, there is only darkness, snow, and the occasional muffled force of wind. Inside, each piece of wood placed on the hearth represents time bought against the cold. Someone remains awake a little longer, watching the flames settle and judging when another branch should be added. The task is repetitive but never trivial. A firekeeper notices colour, sound, smoke, and the position of coals. Yet cracking may mean one kind of wood is burning quickly, A quiet red bed of embers promises lasting heat. A sudden cloud of smoke means airflow has changed. Skill grows through hundreds of ordinary nights until tending a fire becomes almost instinctive. Your eyes grow heavy while the flames shrink into a steady orange glow. The hearth does not defeat winter or make the storm disappear. It creates something smaller and more practical, a controlled source of warmth in a world where warmth cannot be taken for granted. Around that carefully protected fire, ancient humans gain enough heat, light, and time to keep the cold at a manageable distance. You pull a heavy hide around your shoulders and discover that winter clothing is not simply something worn over the body. It is a portable shelter, shaped to move with you, for ancient humans living in severe cold. The difference between loosely draped skin and carefully fitted clothing can be enormous. Warmth depends on trapping air close to the body while keeping wind from pushing through every opening, which makes cutting, stitching, layering, and fastening surprisingly important technologies. The outer layer may begin with a hide from reindeer, deer, bison, horse, or another large animal, depending on the region. Fur left attached to the skin provides thousands of tiny spaces where air can remain trapped. That still air slows heat loss. Turn the fur inward and it creates warmth against the body. Turn another layer outward and it can help protect against wind and snow. Ancient clothing therefore becomes less like one thick blanket and more like a system. Records confirm that prehistoric humans possessed sophisticated tools for processing hides. Scrapers help remove flesh and tissue from skins, while awls and later-eyed needles allow holes and seams to be made with much greater precision. Bone needles from Upper Paleolithic contexts are especially revealing because fitted garments require far more careful sewing than a simple hide thrown over the shoulders. Clothing becomes evidence of planning, patience, and remarkable manual skill. You run your fingers across a seam and feel the small ridges where one piece of skin overlaps another. A badly placed seam can let wind enter, while a well-fitted joint helps seal the garment. Sleeves, leggings, hoods, and enclosed footwear protect areas that would be difficult to cover with one large hide. The design does not need to resemble modern tailoring to be technically impressive. It only needs to work. Thread can come from animal sinew, which becomes strong and flexible when prepared correctly. Thin strips are separated, dried, softened, and used for sewing. Plant fibers may also serve in some regions. The needle itself can be made from bone or ivory, polished smooth enough to pass through holes without tearing the hide unnecessarily. A tiny tool no longer than a finger can become one of the most important inventions in a cold climate. The body loses heat quickly from exposed extremities, so hands and feet demand special attention. Mittens are often warmer than gloves because fingers remain together and share heat. Foot coverings may combine soft inner layers with tougher outer skins. Dry grass, moss, fur, or other fibrous material can be stuffed around the feet for insulation. This may look primitive, but the underlying principle is exactly what winter clothing still relies upon. Trap dry air and prevent moisture from remaining against the skin. Your toes are especially vulnerable because they are far from the warm centre of the body. If footwear is too tight, circulation can be restricted and cold injury becomes more likely. If it is too loose, snow can enter. Ancient people who spend entire winters outdoors learn the correct balance through daily experience. A boot is not just protection from the ground. It must flex, insulate, stay reasonably dry, and survive repeated movement. Moisture creates constant trouble. Snow can melt against warm clothing, and sweat can damp inner layers during hard travel. Once movement stops, that moisture begins stealing heat. This gives clothing management a rhythm. You may loosen garments while climbing or carrying a heavy load, then close them again when resting. It is a subtle skill, because staying warm sometimes means preventing yourself from becoming too warm. Oddly enough, fur orientation can make a meaningful difference depending on the garment and conditions. Fur turned inward traps warmth close to the body, while fur outward can help shed snow and protect the underlying hide. Some cold-adapted cultures use combinations of both. Ancient humans may have discovered similar advantages experimentally, though the exact arrangement of prehistoric garments is difficult to recover because skins almost always decay. A curious footnote lies in the tiny marks left on tools. Wear patterns on stone scrapers can sometimes reveal that they were used on certain hides, and residues may offer further clues. Archaeologists can therefore infer clothing production even when no garment survives. A scraper that looks unremarkable in a museum display may once have spent hours preparing the skin that kept someone alive through a bitter winter. Hoods are particularly valuable because the head, face and neck are exposed to wind. A fitted hood reduces gaps around the shoulders and protects ears without requiring a separate object that can easily be lost. Fur around the edge may disturb airflow slightly and keep blowing snow away from the face. Even small improvements become significant when exposure lasts for hours. You feel cold air probing the opening near your throat, and your hand immediately tightens the fastening. Fasteners can be simple cords, toggles, pins, or tied strips of hide. Their importance becomes obvious as soon as wind rises. A garment that cannot be closed securely is little better than a door that refuses to shut during a storm. Layering allows more control. A soft inner layer provides warmth and comfort, while an outer covering blocks wind and moisture. Additional pieces can be added during rest or removed during exertion. This modular approach makes clothing adaptable to changing conditions, rather than forcing one heavy garment to serve every purpose. No agreement has been reached on exactly when fully tailored, cold weather clothing became widespread among early modern humans and Neanderthals. Scholars examine needles, hide working tools, climate, body form, and genetic evidence from parasites associated with clothing, but each source has limitations. Some argue that tightly fitted garments were essential for expansion into very cold regions, while others suggest that simpler wrapped hides may have remained effective in many circumstances. Neanderthals complicate the picture further. They lived through cold periods in Europe and Western Asia, yet clear evidence for eyed needles is more strongly associated with later modern human populations. That does not mean Neanderthals lacked sewn garments. Awls can pierce hides, and cordage or sinew can bind pieces without an eyed needle. Archaeology preserves tools more readily than technique, which leaves plenty of room for debate. Your clothing also carries traces of work. Smoke settles into the fur. Fat from processed hides helps soften some skins and may improve resistance to moisture. Dirt collects around knees and cuffs. Repairs appear where seams have weakened. A winter garment is valuable enough to maintain repeatedly rather than casually replace. The smell is distinctive animal skin. Smoke, grease, damp woolly fur, and the faint earthy scent of dried plants stuffing around the feet. Nothing about it resembles a freshly washed wardrobe, but cleanliness is not the primary concern. Performance matters more. The clothing must hold warmth while you walk, hunt, carry, crouch, sleep, and work. You begin to understand how much intelligence is contained in an apparently simple coat. Someone chooses the animal skin, prepares it, cuts it, pierces it, stitches it, tests it, repairs it, and learns how to wear it properly. Every decision reduces exposure by a small amount. Put together, those decisions make possible journeys and winters that an unclothed human body could never endure. The wind can still press against you, but now it encounters layer after layer before reaching skin. Fur traps warmth, seams close openings, leggings protect moving limbs, foot coverings keep frozen ground at a distance, a hood turns away blowing snow. Ancient humans do not grow thick winter coats of their own, so they do something far more characteristic of the species. They make one. You lower yourself toward the sleeping place and discover that surviving a winter night is not simply a matter of closing your eyes. The ground beneath you is cold enough to drain warmth for hours, the air continues to cool after sunset, and their body naturally reduces activity during sleep. Ancient humans therefore need to prepare the place where they rest with nearly as much care as the clothing they wear. A good sleeping arrangement can preserve energy, reduce heat loss, and turn a dangerously cold night into something merely uncomfortable, which in prehistoric winter counts as a very respectable success. The first problem is the ground. Frozen earth, stone, and packed snow conduct heat away from the body far more efficiently than dry air. Lie directly on them, and warmth moves steadily downward. Even if your upper body is wrapped in hides, the solution is insulation. Dry grass, reeds, leaves, bark, small branches, moss, and animal skins can be layered beneath the body to create a barrier filled with trapped air. You press your hand into a thick bed of vegetation and feel how different it is from bare ground. The surface gives slightly beneath your weight. Dry stems bend and overlap, leaving countless tiny spaces between them. Those spaces matter because still air resists heat transfer. A mattress made from plant material may look crude, but its purpose is sophisticated. It separates warm flesh from frozen earth. Records confirm that prehistoric humans sometimes created deliberate bedding areas from grasses and other plant materials. At several archaeological sites, researchers have identified concentrations of vegetation associated with occupation surfaces, hearths, and sleeping spaces. Organic material rarely survives under ordinary conditions, so the evidence is incomplete. But the surviving examples show that people were not necessarily collapsing onto bare cave floors at the end of the day. The thickness of the bedding matters more than neatness. A thin layer may provide little insulation once compressed beneath the body. A deeper pile continues trapping air even under weight. Branches placed underneath can lift softer material away from the damp soil. Hides laid over the top create a smoother surface and add another insulating layer. For a moment, your mind drifts toward the sounds of a group settling down. Dry grass rustles under shifting shoulders, a leather covering creaks, someone rearranges a bundle near their feet. A child murmurs briefly, and then becomes quiet. The noises are small because the sleeping area is compact, and compactness is useful when every person is a source of warmth. Shared body heat can make a significant difference. When people sleep close together, the surfaces between them lose less heat to the surrounding air. Adults may position children or vulnerable individuals toward the warmer centre of the group. The arrangement is practical rather than particularly elegant. Personal space becomes a luxury for another climate. You might imagine a cluster of sleepers arranged almost like overlapping layers, shoulders closed, feet tucked inward, hides spread across several bodies at once. One large covering can trap warmth more effectively than several small pieces that leave gaps around the edges. The group itself becomes part of the insulation system. This does not mean everyone sleeps comfortably. A person near the outer edge receives more cold air, someone has a knee pressed against their back, another person snores with prehistoric determination. Yet the disadvantages of crowding are minor compared with the advantage of maintaining warmth. Winter encourages a certain tolerance for other people's elbows. Sleeping posture matters too. Curling the body reduces exposed surface area and brings arms and legs closer to the warm core. The position also protects the abdomen and chest. Someone lying stretched out alone presents more surface to the cold. Ancient humans do not need equations to discover that curling beneath a hide feels warmer. A curious footnote concerns head position. The face must remain free enough for comfortable breathing, but the rest of the head and neck can be heavily insulated. People may pull fur or hide around the sides of the face while keeping the mouth and nose clear. Warm breath can damp coverings if trapped too closely, and that moisture can eventually become a problem in freezing conditions. Oddly enough, too much warmth can also create danger if it leads to heavy sweating. Bedding and shared body heat can become surprisingly effective inside a protected space. If inner clothing grows damp during sleep, the person may chill rapidly when getting up or moving into colder air. Managing sleep therefore requires some of the same judgment as managing activity during the day. You settle farther into the bedding and notice the scent rising around you. Dried grass has a faint sweet smell. Hides carry smoke, animal fat, and earth. Bits of crushed herbs may be mixed unintentionally into the plant material, adding sharper notes. The smell is not luxurious, but it becomes associated with safety because it belongs to the protected sleeping place. Historians still argue whether some prehistoric bedding arrangements were designed mainly for comfort, warmth, insect control, or a combination of purposes. At certain sites, plants with insect-repelling properties appear among sleeping materials, raising intriguing questions about whether they were chosen deliberately. Archaeologists must be careful because plants can enter occupation layers naturally, but the possibility suggests that sleeping spaces may have involved more planning than simple insulation. Rest itself is a survival resource. A person who remains awake all night from cold becomes slower, less coordinated, and less attentive during the following day. Fatigue increases the chance of mistakes during hunting, tool use, travel, and food preparation. Sleep allows the body to recover, making the sleeping area an important part of the group's broader survival strategy. The location of each sleeper can be chosen with care. Someone responsible for tending a low fire may remain nearest the hearth, where they can wake easily and add fuel without stepping across the entire group. Children may be placed away from sparks. Older or injured people may receive thicker bedding or a more protected position. The layout becomes a quiet map of practical needs. You hear a soft shift beside you as another person pulls a covering higher over their shoulders. No elaborate conversation is necessary. Everyone understands the shared problem. Gaps are closed, feet are tucked beneath fur, a loose edge is weighted with a stone or bundle. The sleeping place gradually becomes more sealed and stable. The night air still cools, but the body creates heat continuously through metabolism. The sleeping system works by slowing the escape of that heat. Layers beneath reduce conduction into the ground, hides above reduce heat loss into the air. Nearby bodies create a warmer local environment. Curling reduces exposed surface. Each method contributes a little, and together they can be remarkably effective. There is also psychological comfort in sleeping close to others. Darkness outside the camp contains predators, unfamiliar sounds, and uncertain weather. A group provides reassurance as well as warmth. You can hear breathing nearby. Someone shifts when a branch cracks outside. Another person wakes briefly, listens, and settles again. Safety is distributed among many sleeping bodies rather than resting on one exhausted individual. A council decree cannot prove anything about prehistoric sleeping habits. Of course, but archaeology can reveal something equally useful. Repeated human occupation often leaves organized living surfaces rather than random scatter. Hearths, tool working areas, refuse zones. And plant concentration suggests that camps can have structure. Sleeping is part of that structure because people naturally arrange space around warmth, cleanliness, safety, and access. As the hours pass, the bedding compresses beneath you, yet enough dry material remains to keep your body away from the frozen floor. The shared covering grows warm where shoulders touch. Outside the protected space, frost continues forming on exposed surfaces. Inside, the temperature does not need to become comfortable by modern standards. It only needs to remain survivable. Your breathing slows. The roughness of bark beneath the grass fades from attention. A distant crack from frozen wood briefly reaches your ears and then disappears into silence. Ancient humans endure cold nights not by ignoring the vulnerability of sleep, but by engineering around it with layers, positioning, shared warmth, and careful use of simple materials, even rest becomes a practice technology, and beneath a mound of grass and hide, the body is finally allowed to spend several quiet hours conserving the energy it will need when daylight returns. You wake hungry, and in severe cold that sensation carries more urgency than usual. Keeping a human body warm requires energy, and winter raises the cost of nearly everything you do. Walking through snow, carrying fuel, processing hides, hunting, and simply maintaining body temperature all consume precious calories. Ancient humans survived not only by finding food, but by understanding which foods deliver the richest return for the effort spent obtaining them. Fat becomes especially valuable. Lean meat provides protein, but fatty tissue, marrow, and organs can supply dense energy that helps sustain the body during prolonged cold. In harsh climates, hunters may pay close attention to the condition of animals because a thin animal at the end of winter offers far less usable energy than a well-fed one. Food is not judged only by quantity, its composition matters. Records confirm that prehistoric people broke large animal bones deliberately to extract marrow. Archaeological sites often contain bones fractured in ways consistent with processing while still fresh. Marrow is calorie-rich, compact, and relatively easy to consume once the bone is opened. A heavy femur may look like inconvenient leftovers until someone cracks it and reveals the soft energy stored inside. You hold a stone hammer in both hands and strike carefully. The sound is sharp against the cold air. Bone splits, exposing pale marrow within. Nothing elegant happens next. You scrape it out, eat it, and feel the heaviness of fat coat your mouth. In winter, delicacy is less important than fuel. Rendered fat can also be valuable because it concentrates energy and can sometimes be mixed with dried meat or other foods. Even without pottery, heated stones, hide containers, and simple roasting techniques may allow people to process animal fat in useful ways. The exact methods vary widely, but the basic principle remains simple: do not waste the richest part of a successful hunt. One curious footnote concerns so-called protein poisoning, sometimes discussed in relation to diets based heavily on extremely lean meat. A person consuming too much lean protein without enough fat or carbohydrate can struggle to meet energy needs and may become ill. Later northern populations recognized the danger of relying on very lean animals during difficult seasons. Whether prehistoric groups conceptualized this in the same way is impossible to know, but practical experience would have taught them that some meat satisfied hunger better than other meat. You chew a strip of dried meat and notice how much effort it takes. Drying reduces weight and helps preserve food, making it valuable for travel and bad weather. Smoked meat can also last longer than fresh meat under suitable conditions. Freezing itself becomes a preservation method in winter. Though repeated thawing can create problems, cold that threatens life can simultaneously protect stored food from rapid spoilage. Storage changes survival dramatically. If every meal depends on a successful hunt that same day, a blizzard becomes terrifying. If food has been dried, frozen, smoked, cached, or otherwise preserved, the group gains time. Several stormbound days become manageable rather than immediately disastrous. Planning turns yesterday's abundance into tomorrow's security. The location of a cache matters. Meat left openly accessible may attract wolves, foxes, birds, or other scavengers. Food can be hung, buried, and covered with stones, frozen into protected pits, or stored in places animals find difficult to reach. Each method creates its own problems, and prehistoric people must understand both animal behavior and local conditions. Oddly enough, extreme cold can make food almost too well preserved. Frozen meat may become so hard that cutting it is difficult. Tools can slip against its surface, and large portions require thawing near heat before they can be processed comfortably. Dinner may be available in abundance while still behaving like a piece of building material. Your hands work slowly as a frozen joint softens near warmth. Someone slices thin pieces from the outer edge rather than waiting for the entire mass to thaw. This saves fuel and allows food to be eaten gradually. Small decisions like this matter because cooking energy is limited. Every branch burned to thaw meat is a branch unavailable for warmth. Plant foods do not disappear entirely from winter diets, though access varies by region and season. Nuts, seeds, dried berries, roots, and stored plant foods may supplement meat where available. Some roots can remain underground beneath snow, though digging frozen soil is hard work. Dried plants gathered during warmer months can provide variety and nutrients long after fresh vegetation has vanished. Historians still argue whether some cold-adapted prehistoric populations relied overwhelmingly on animal foods during the deepest winter, or maintained more mixed diets than older reconstructions suggested. Stable isotope studies can reveal heavy dependence on animal protein in certain groups, but they do not capture every food equally well. Plant foods often leave less dramatic traces, which means dietary reconstructions remain incomplete. Children create another nutritional challenge, because small bodies lose heat quickly and cannot always consume large portions of tough food. Softer marrow, cooked organs, mashed foods, and shared portions may help. Older adults with worn teeth face similar issues. Food preparation therefore serves more than taste. It makes valuable calories accessible to people who might otherwise struggle to eat them. You smell meat warming and hear fat hiss softly where it touches a hot stone. The scent spreads through the shelter with remarkable authority. Hunger sharpens attention. People begin shifting closer, not because anyone announced a meal, but because ancient noses remain excellent at detecting the arrival of something edible. Meal timing can matter in cold weather. Eating before rest gives the body energy for heat production through the night, while eating before travel provides fuel for movement. A large meal may produce a temporary sensation of warmth as digestion increases metabolic activity. Ancient people may not describe this scientifically, yet the connection between food and warmth is obvious through experience. Sharing reduces risk. One hunter may fail while another succeeds. One family may have preserved meat while another has exhausted its supply. Group sharing allows resources to move where they are needed, improving the survival chances of the whole community. A person who gives food today may depend on someone else's success later. This social exchange is especially important when storms interrupt hunting. Animals may be difficult to locate. Travel may be unsafe, and traps or hunting grounds may become inaccessible. Stored food gives the group breathing room, but shared food extends that advantage further. Survival becomes less dependent on individual luck. You break another piece of dried meat and pass half to the person beside you. The gesture is ordinary, almost automatic. There is no speech about generosity. Everyone understands that hunger is a shared danger. A group that divides food intelligently can survive short periods of scarcity more effectively than one in which each person guards every scrap. Fat itself may be rationed carefully because it is so valuable. A small amount can improve a lean meal dramatically. Grease can be saved from cooking and mixed into other foods. Bones can be reheated or smashed more thoroughly to recover remaining marrow and fat. Winter encourages a level of attention to leftovers that would make a modern refrigerator inspection seem rather casual. The body responds quickly when enough energy arrives. Cold does not disappear, but strength returns. Hands feel steadier. Thinking becomes clearer. Muscles can continue producing heat. Hunger is no longer an irritating background sensation, but a measurable threat that has been reduced. You begin to understand that winter food strategy is built on density, preservation, and timing. Fatty tissues provide concentrated energy. Marrow turns bones into valuable reserves. Drying and freezing stretch abundance across difficult days. Caches protect future meals. Sharing spreads risk. Careful preparation makes food easier to use. The storm outside may prevent hunting entirely, but the group does not immediately panic because survival depends on more than what can be killed in the next hour. Food gathered days or weeks earlier continues working quietly in the present. Ancient humans endure deadly cold partly because they learned to think beyond immediate hunger, turning every successful hunt and harvest into stored warmth for a future that may arrive buried beneath snow. You discover that thirst behaves strangely in the cold weather. The air feels sharp and dry. Your food breath turns to vapour. And yet you may not feel as thirsty as you would under a hot sun. That quiet reduction in thirst can be dangerous because your body still loses water through breathing, sweating beneath heavy clothing, and the ordinary work of digestion and circulation. Ancient humans enduring winter storms therefore face a problem that looks absurd at first. Water can surround you in every direction while safe drinking water remains surprisingly difficult to obtain. Snow seems like the obvious solution. You scoop a handful and hold it near your mouth. But eating large amounts of snow directly can lower body temperature and may leave you colder than before. Fresh snow is mostly air, so an enormous volume can melt into a relatively small amount of liquid. Filling your stomach with frozen crystals also forces your body to spend energy warming them. The better strategy is to melt snow gradually and drink it once warmed. A container becomes extremely useful, but prehistoric people do not necessarily possess pottery in many periods of deep antiquity. They can still improvise. Hides can be shaped into bags or shallow vessels, bark can be folded and secured, and hollowed wood can hold liquid. A watertight container does not need to resemble a modern pot. It only needs to keep water from escaping long enough to become useful. Records confirm that prehistoric communities possessed sophisticated organic technologies even when those objects rarely survive archaeologically. Wooden containers, baskets, hide bags, and bark vessels decay easily, which means the archaeological record tends to exaggerate the importance of stone simply because stone is stubborn enough to remain. The absence of preserve buckets does not mean people wandered around waiting helplessly for someone to invent a ceramic cup. You place snow into a hide-lined hollow and add warm stones one at a time. The stones have been heated nearby, but not until they are dangerously hot. As they enter the snow, a faint hiss begins. Ice collapses into slush, then into water. More snow is added gradually because the first handful seems to vanish into almost nothing. Hot stone heating offers a clever solution when a container cannot be placed directly over flames. Stones are warmed separately, lifted with sticks or wooden tongs, then lowered into liquid. Several changes may be needed before the water becomes comfortably warm. The method requires care because a stone heated too aggressively may crack, and dropping one carelessly into a hide vessel is an excellent way to turn precious drinking water into precious water leaking across the floor. Natural liquid water can sometimes be found beneath ice. Rivers and streams may continue flowing under a frozen surface, especially where currents remain strong. Reaching that water is not simple. Ice thickness varies. Snow can hide weak areas, and a person approaching the wrong section risks breaking through. Knowledge of local waterways therefore matters enormously. You crouch near a familiar stream where the current makes a muffled rushing sound beneath ice. The surface looks solid, but subtle differences in colour and texture reveal places where freezing is thinner. A safer opening may be found near the bank or where water remains exposed around rocks. Ancient people who use the same landscape season after season learn these details through repetition. Springs can be even more valuable. Groundwater emerging from the earth may remain unfrozen when surrounding pools are sealed beneath ice. A small spring can become an important winter resource, particularly if its location is known in advance. Snow may conceal it completely from someone unfamiliar with the terrain, turning memory into the difference between finding water easily and spending hours melting snow. Oddly enough, Cold weather can increase water loss through breathing. The air entering your lungs is warmed and humidified, and each exhalation releases moisture into the environment. You see the process constantly as white vapour leaving your mouth. Heavy exertion makes breathing faster, which increases this loss even while thirst remains muted. Sweating creates another hidden drain. You may feel cold outside while becoming surprisingly warm beneath layers during difficult travel or labour. Sweat collects against the skin and clothing, carrying water away while also increasing the risk of chilling later. Drinking must therefore replace losses that are not always obvious. A curious footnote is that some northern peoples have traditionally eaten ice or snow in carefully managed ways when liquid water is unavailable. But context matters. Small amounts may be tolerable when the person is already warm and well protected. Large quantities consumed while severely chilled can be a poor bargain. Ancient people probably learned this distinction through experience rather than through any formal rule. Your lips become dry before your mind fully recognizes thirst. Saliva feels thicker. The tongue begins sticking slightly to the inside of the mouth. These signs matter because dehydration can reduce physical performance and mental sharpness, exactly the abilities needed when conditions are already difficult. Severe dehydration can also contribute to confusion, weakness, and poor circulation. There is another problem. Water can freeze after you have worked to produce it. A hide bag placed near an entrance may become solid overnight. A wooden container left on cold ground can develop a thick layer of ice. Keeping water close to occupied space, wrapping the vessel in insulating material, or drinking soon after melting reduces waste. No agreement has been reached on how prehistoric people transported water regularly in extremely cold environments because containers made from hide, wood, and bark leave little trace. Some archaeologists emphasize the likely importance of skin bags, while others point to stomachs, bladders, woven containers lined with resin, and other organic possibilities. The difficulty is not imagining suitable technology, it is proving which technology was used at a particular place and time. Food contributes water too. Fresh meat contains moisture, and cooked stews or broths provide both fluid and nutrients where vessels permit their preparation. Frozen meat, however, may provide less immediately available water than expected until warmed. A diet based heavily on dried foods can increase the need for separate drinking water. You watch melted snow darken slightly as particles of ash and plant debris settle to the bottom. Cleanliness matters, though not with modern expectations. Snow collected from heavily trampled or smoky areas may contain dirt, animal waste, or other contamination. Choosing fresh snow from a cleaner surface is an easy improvement. Ancient people do not need microbiology to notice that some water sources make people ill more often than others. Boiling can reduce many biological risks when suitable containers and fuel are available, but fuel is valuable during storms. Every additional heating task competes with warmth and cooking. People may therefore rely on trusted springs or clean-flowing water when possible, and melt snow only when necessary. Water gathering becomes another exercise in balancing energy costs. The taste of warm snowmelt is remarkably plain. It has little mineral flavour compared with spring water, and may feel almost empty on the tongue. Still, the sensation of liquid moving through a dry mouth is deeply satisfying. You drink slowly, allowing the warmth to spread downward rather than swallowing a large amount at once. Children and older adults may need encouragement to drink because reduced thirst affects them too. Someone focused on tending equipment or resting from exhaustion can simply forget. Group awareness helps here. Passing a container around transforms hydration into a shared routine rather than an individual decision. Ancient winter survival depends on noticing dangers that do not announce themselves dramatically. Hunger complains loudly. Wind screams against walls. Thirst can remain quiet. That makes it easy to overlook until weakness begins, a knowledgeable group treats water as something that must be planned for even when snow piles against the shelter. You lift the container again, and steam curls faintly from its surface. Outside, the landscape remains locked in ice. Yet enough liquid has been coaxed from that frozen abundance to keep bodies functioning. There is a certain elegance in the solution. Snow becomes water. Warmed stones become tools. Hidden springs become landmarks. And careful drinking becomes another small act of resistance against the cold. You notice that survival becomes easier the moment responsibility stops belonging to one person. A blizzard can defeat even a skilled individual through exhaustion, injury, or simple bad luck. But a group can divide the burden. One person gathers fuel, another watches children, another repairs clothing, another prepares food, and someone else listens for changes outside. Ancient humans do not survive severe winter by acting like isolated heroes. They survive because cooperation turns many limited bodies into one flexible system. A small group has advantages that are easy to underestimate. If one person becomes tired, another can continue the task. If someone is injured, others can carry food and equipment. If a hunter returns empty-handed, another may have succeeded. Shared effort spreads risk across the community, and in dangerous weather that can be the difference between temporary hardship and disaster. Records confirm that prehistoric communities sometimes cared for individuals who survived serious injuries or physical limitations for long periods. Skeletal remains from several ancient populations show healed wounds and conditions that would likely have made independent survival difficult. Such evidence suggests that social support was not an occasional luxury. In some cases, people must have been fed, protected, or assisted while recovering. You watch a group organise itself without anything resembling a formal meeting. A few gestures are enough. Someone points toward a stack of wood that needs covering. Another person takes a bundle from a tired companion. Two adults shift closer to a child who has begun shivering. Cooperation often works through habit rather than discussion, because repeated routines become part of communal life. Food sharing is especially important. Hunting success is unpredictable, and large animals provide more meat than one person can consume quickly. Sharing allows the group to distribute abundance before it spoils or freezes beyond easy use. It also creates a social expectation that today's successful hunter may receive help on another day when luck changes. The same principle applies to tools. A well-made scraper, needle, cutting edge, or hammer can serve several people. If one tool breaks, another may be available. Knowledge of repair is shared too. A person who understands hide work may fix clothing for several companions, while someone skilled in stoneworking maintains cutting tools. Specialization does not need to be rigid to be useful. You hear soft conversation while several people work with their hands. Instructions pass casually from older members to younger ones. A knot is demonstrated. A child is shown how to keep dry grass away from sparks. Someone corrects the way a stone blade is being held. Knowledge survives because it is embedded in ordinary activity. A curious footnote is that some archaeologists study the distribution of tools and food remains within camps to infer patterns of social behaviour. If certain activities repeatedly cluster around particular areas, it may suggest division of tasks or organised use of space. The evidence is rarely simple, but even scattered objects can reveal that prehistoric life involved more structure than random survival from one hour to the next. Oddly enough, boredom itself may have social consequences during long periods of confinement. People trapped by severe weather cannot hunt constantly or travel far. Conversation, storytelling, teaching, singing, rhythm, and games may help maintain morale while also reinforcing memory and group identity. Archaeology cannot preserve a joke told during a snowstorm, which is probably fortunate for the joke. But humans are social enough that silence is unlikely to have filled every winter night. The emotional effect of companionship matters because fear can distort judgment, A person alone may panic when visibility disappears, or when strange sounds surround the shelter. In a group, anxiety is distributed. One person may remain calm while another becomes frightened. The presence of others provides information as well as comfort. If everyone reacts to a sound, it deserves attention. If nobody else appears concerned, perhaps the branch cracking outside can remain merely a branch. Division of labour also saves energy. Not everyone needs to leave shelter to gather the same resource. A small team can collect wood, while others remain inside completing tasks that require warmth and dexterity. Sending every person outside would waste calories and expose more bodies to risk. Efficient cooperation means matching the number of workers to the job. Children contribute too, though according to ability, they can carry small bundles, gather light materials nearby, sort dry from damp fuel, or help with simple food preparation. Participation teaches skills long before those skills become essential for adult survival. A winter camp becomes a classroom without benches, schedules, or the faintest possibility of escaping homework by claiming the dog ate it. Older adults may provide a different form of value. Physical strength can decline, but memory can increase in importance. Someone who has witnessed many winters may recognize unusual conditions, remember resource locations, or know how previous storms were managed. In environments where mistakes can be fatal, accumulated experience becomes a form of wealth. Scholars still argue whether the unusually strong cooperation associated with humans developed primarily through hunting, childcare, food sharing, defense, environmental pressures, or some combination of all these forces. There is broad agreement that human sociality is ancient, but the exact evolutionary pathways remain debated. Cold climates may have intensified dependence on cooperation without being the original cause of it. You feel how cooperation changes the atmosphere of the shelter. No single person must remain alert to every problem. Responsibilities circulate. Someone sleeps while another watches the fire. Someone eats while another finishes repairing a torn binding. Someone comforts a restless child while another prepares equipment. The group absorbs strain through rotation. This shared attention matters greatly during emergencies. If someone begins showing signs of dangerous chilling, companions may notice before the affected person understands what is happening. Confusion can make self-assessment unreliable. A group provides external judgment. Someone can insist that a person stop working, move closer to warmth, change damp clothing, or eat. Communication does not need elaborate vocabulary to be effective. A gesture toward the entrance can mean stay inside. A hand placed against another person's arm can check whether they are trembling. Repeated customs reduce the amount of explanation required. Shared habits become a survival language. Conflicts undoubtedly occur as well. Hunger, fatigue, and confinement do not magically produce harmony. Food distribution can create tension. Decisions about travel may divide opinions. Someone may resent carrying more work than another. Cooperation succeeds not because humans are endlessly agreeable, but because groups develop ways to continue functioning despite disagreement. One mainstream historical fact from later hunter-gatherer societies supports this broader pattern. Food sharing, cooperative childcare, and flexible task division have often been central to communities living in demanding environments. Prehistoric groups varied enormously, so no single modern example can be copied backward in time. Yet the comparison helps show how social systems themselves can become survival technologies. You pass a tool to the person beside you without thinking. They use it, return it, and continue working. The exchange lasts only seconds, but it represents something enormous. Human beings constantly extend their abilities through other people. Your tool may become someone else's hand. Their knowledge may become your solution. The group also preserves memory beyond the lifespan of any individual. A child hears which valley floods in spring. which animals move before storms, which plants can be gathered in cold months, and which mistakes caused trouble years ago. Useful experience does not vanish when one person dies because stories, habits, and demonstrations carry it forward. Your surroundings gradually settle into a quiet rhythm of coordinated work. Hands pass food, someone tightens a loose fastening on another person's clothing. A tired adult shifts closer to the centre, while another takes their place near the edge. Nothing looks dramatic, yet each small exchange reduces danger. Ancient humans survive deadly blizzards partly because they refuse, in practical terms, to remain separate problems. Hunger becomes shared food, fatigue becomes shared labour, knowledge becomes shared memory, fear becomes shared attention. In the coldest moments, cooperation does something no single hide, tool or flame can accomplish on its own. It turns a collection of vulnerable individuals into a community capable of carrying one another through the storm. You look toward the smallest members of the group and understand immediately that cold does not treat everybody equally. Children lose heat more quickly because their bodies have more surface area relative to their mass, while older adults may have less strength, slower circulation, or injuries that make movement difficult. In severe winter, survival depends not only on protecting the strongest hunters and workers, but on keeping vulnerable people warm enough to remain part of the community. A child may become dangerously cold long before an adult notices the same discomfort. Small hands stiffen quickly, wet clothing becomes serious, and fatigue can arrive suddenly. Ancient caregivers therefore need to pay attention to behaviour rather than waiting for a child to announce a problem. A quiet child who stops playing, becomes clumsy, or begins shivering intensely may need warmth immediately. You reach down and adjust a fur covering around a young child's shoulders. The garment is slightly oversized, perhaps intentionally, allowing layers to be added beneath it. Small bodies grow quickly, and clothing that fits perfectly for one season may be useless by the next. Practical winter clothing may therefore be designed with ties, folds, or adjustable openings that allow it to serve for longer. Records confirm that prehistoric communities cared for those children far beyond infancy, and burial evidence, footprints, tools, and living spaces show that young people were active members of ancient groups. Childhood was not simply the waiting period before adulthood. Children learned by watching, imitating, carrying, sorting, and gradually taking on more difficult tasks. This matters during storms because children can contribute without being exposed to the most dangerous work. They may gather small pieces of dry material within a protected area, help prepare food, keep tools together, or watch younger siblings. The tasks are modest, but they teach competence and make the child part of the group's daily rhythm. Older adults present a different challenge. A person who has survived many winters may possess valuable knowledge, but struggle with long distances, steep ground or prolonged cold, arthritis, old fractures, worn joints, and reduced muscle strength can make winter travel exhausting. A group that values experience has good reason to protect such people, even when their physical contribution becomes smaller. A healed fracture can tell an extraordinary story. Some prehistoric skeletons show serious injuries that survived long enough to heal, implying that the injured person received food and protection while mobility was limited. A person with a damaged limb may not have been able to hunt or gather normally for weeks or months. Survival under those circumstances suggests assistance from others. You imagine helping an injured companion across uneven snow. Two people take their weight from either side while another carries equipment. Progress becomes slow, but the group adjusts. A journey that might take one healthy adult an hour becomes a shared task stretching much longer. The calculation changes from speed to preservation. One curious footnote is that some famous prehistoric individuals lived for years, despite significant disability. Archaeologists have debated cases involving severe injuries, missing limbs, degenerative conditions, or sensory impairment. These remains complicate the old stereotype of ancient life as a world where anyone unable to keep pace was simply abandoned. Care itself requires resources. An injured person still needs food, clothing, warmth, and shelter. Someone must spend time assisting them. In periods of scarcity, this represents a real cost. The fact that communities sometimes accepted that cost suggests that social bonds could outweigh immediate efficiency. Oddly enough, vulnerability can also create opportunities for knowledge transfer. A person unable to travel far may spend more time repairing tools, teaching children, preparing fibres, telling stories, or supervising camp activities. Physical limitation does not automatically mean social uselessness. Ancient groups likely recognize many forms of contribution, just as human communities do in other periods. Your attention shifts to an older woman whose hands remain remarkably skilled despite stiff fingers. She demonstrates how to repair a torn seam, guiding a younger person through the motion. The task requires patience rather than speed. Her memory of materials, weather, routes, and past hardships may be worth more than the distance she can walk in a day. No agreement has been reached on how systematically prehistoric groups organised care for older or disabled members. Skeletal evidence can reveal survival after injury, but it cannot tell you whether support came from relatives, the whole community, or occasional assistance. Nor can archaeology easily reveal emotional motives such as affection, duty, respect, or compassion. Children are particularly dependent on warmth during sleep and inactivity. Adults can place them between larger bodies, wrap them in shared hides, and keep them away from drafts. Infants may be carried close to the body, benefiting from direct warmth while allowing caregivers to move. A sling or hide carrier can free the hands while keeping the child protected. The scent around you is a mixture of fur, milk, smoke, and damp leather. A baby stirs against someone's chest, then settles again beneath a fold of hide. The arrangement is simple but effective. The adult body becomes a living heat source, maintaining a warmer microenvironment around the infant. Feeding children during cold weather may require special preparation. Tough dried meat is difficult for very young mouths, so food can be softened, minced, mashed, or shared in smaller pieces. Fatty foods provide concentrated energy in portions that are easier to consume. Caregivers must think not only about how much food exists, but about whether vulnerable people can actually eat it. Older adults with worn teeth face similar problems. Prehistoric teeth often endured heavy wear from coarse foods, grit, and repeated use. Softer preparations can allow someone with damaged teeth to continue receiving enough nutrition. Food processing therefore becomes part of care, not merely cooking. An injured person also needs protection from becoming damp or immobile for too long. Someone who cannot move easily produces less heat through activity. They may require extra insulation, warmer placement, or frequent checks. The group learns to notice small changes in skin colour, alertness, and movement. You feel the cold iron-like hardness of a stone tool resting beside an injured leg and realise how quickly inactivity can turn uncomfortable. The person shifts carefully, assisted by someone nearby. No dramatic ceremony accompanies the act. Help is woven into ordinary behaviour. Scholars bicker over whether care for disabled individuals should be interpreted as evidence of compassion in the modern emotional sense. Some argue that long-term survival strongly suggests empathy and attachment. Others caution that assistance might also reflect kinship obligations, practical value, or social expectation. The motives are difficult to recover, but the behaviour itself remains significant. Protection can include deciding who does not go outside during severe weather. The strongest adults may take on dangerous tasks while children, elders, and injured people remain sheltered. This concentrates exposure among those best able to tolerate it. The choice is not perfectly fair in terms of workload. but fairness during a blizzard may look different from fairness on a mild afternoon. Children also observe these decisions. They see who receives help, who carries extra weight, and who shares food. In this way, psychosocial care becomes learned behaviour. A child raised in a community that protects vulnerable members is likely to grow up understanding that survival is collective. You watch one small hand disappear into a larger mitten, and someone laughs softly at the ridiculous size. Humour survives even here. The mitten is tied carefully around the wrist so it does not fall off. A few minutes later, the child is warmer and quieter. Ancient humans are vulnerable creatures, especially at the beginning and end of life. Infants cannot travel independently. Children require years of learning. Injured adults may become temporarily helpless, and older people may slow down. Yet those limitations do not prevent survival because the group can redistribute effort. The strength of the community lies partly in this willingness to protect people who cannot protect themselves fully. Warmth is moved toward the coldest body. Food is softened for the weakest teeth. Loads are shifted from an injured shoulder. The slower traveller is accompanied rather than left alone. You settle closer to the group and notice how naturally these acts fit together. Care is not separate from survival. It is survival. In deadly winter, humanity's advantage is not that every person remains strong, but that weakness can be carried by more than one pair of hands. You notice the fuel pile shrinking, and suddenly every remaining branch seems far more valuable than it did when the storm began. Firewood can disappear with alarming speed during prolonged cold, especially when several people depend on the same heat. Ancient humans facing a long blizzard must therefore think not only about keeping a flame alive, but about stretching every piece of fuel as far as possible. Wood is the obvious choice where forests are available. Yet winter makes collection difficult. Snow buries fallen branches, green wood burns poorly, and exposed limbs may be coated with ice. The best fuel often comes from dead standing wood, dry branches caught beneath thicker limbs, or material collected and stored before conditions become severe. Preparation turns a dangerous search into a simple reach toward a protected pile. Records confirm that prehistoric hearths sometimes contain a surprising variety of burned materials rather than wood alone. Charred bone, plant matter, and other residues suggest that ancient people were willing to burn whatever could produce useful heat. In treeless or sparsely wooded environments, this flexibility may have been essential rather than optional. You lift a branch and judge its weight. Dry wood feels lighter than wet wood and often sounds different when struck. Damp pieces can be placed near warmth to dry gradually, while the driest material is saved for moments when the flame needs help. Fuel management becomes a quiet form of rationing, where the best pieces are not necessarily burned first. The size of the fire matters too. A large roaring blaze feels comforting, but it consumes fuel rapidly and may produce more heat than the group can use efficiently. A smaller steady fire, carefully fed, can sometimes provide enough warmth while preserving reserves. Ancient survival favours control over spectacle, which is disappointing if you are hoping for a dramatic bonfire beneath the snow. You push two pieces closer together so that their hottest surfaces reinforce one another. Coals are gathered rather than scattered. Ash is allowed to build around the edges because it helps conserve heat. Small adjustments reduce waste. The fire becomes something managed almost like food, with each piece added only when needed. Bone can become fuel when wood is scarce. Large bones containing fat and marrow residues may burn or smoulder when exposed to sufficient heat, especially when combined with other combustible material. They are not always easy to ignite by themselves, but once a hot fire is established, they can extend burning time and contribute useful heat. A curious footnote is that archaeological hearths containing heavily burned bone have prompted long arguments about whether people were using bone deliberately as fuel or simply burning food waste. In some cold, treeless regions, deliberate fuel use appears plausible because suitable wood would have been limited. Yet distinguishing intention from disposal is difficult when all that remains is a pile of fragments altered by heat. You place a dry split bone near the hottest coals and smell the change almost immediately. The odour is sharper than burning wood, oily and unpleasant. But survival has never required the fire to smell charming. The material darkens, cracks, and begins contributing to the heat. Nothing valuable is discarded casually when winter narrows the available choices. Animal dung can also serve as fuel under the right conditions. Dried dung from large herbivores has been used as a combustible material by many later societies, living in places where timber is scarce. It burns differently from wood, often with a distinctive smell and variable heat, but dry fuel is dry fuel when the alternative is cold. Ancient people following herds would have encountered dung in large quantities, in frozen or arid conditions. Some of it could dry enough to burn. Collecting it may not seem glamorous, but prehistoric survival contains plenty of tasks that would never appear on an inspiring poster. Someone has to gather the useful things, even when the useful thing spent yesterday beneath a reindeer. Scholars bicker over how widespread dung fuel use was during the Paleolithic because direct identification is challenging. Burned organic material can be difficult to distinguish after thousands of years, especially when the hearth deposits are disturbed. Microscopic analysis sometimes helps, but many sites remain ambiguous. Peat and turf can offer other possibilities in certain landscapes. Dense organic soils may smoulder slowly once dried, producing long-lasting heat even if they are difficult to ignite. Grass, reeds, bark, and woody roots can supplement stronger fuels. The exact mixture depends entirely on local resources, which means winter knowledge must be specific to each environment. You begin to see the landscape as a map of stored energy. A fallen branch is future warmth. A patch of dry reeds is tinder. A heap of old dung is potential fuel. A bone left after a meal still contains another use. Ancient humans survived partly because they learned to notice energy where an inexperienced traveller might see only debris. Fuel efficiency also depends on where the fire is placed. A poorly positioned hearth can waste heat into empty space. A compact fire near people and useful surfaces directs more warmth toward the bodies that need it. Stones around the hearth may absorb the heat and release it slowly, while a sheltered position prevents wind from carrying hot air away too quickly. You hear the soft ticking of cooling stones as the flame settles lower. Their stored warmth continues radiating even after the visible fire shrinks. This allows the group to reduce fuel consumption without losing all heat at once. Thermal mass becomes another way of stretching limited resources. Cooking can be timed around periods when the fire is already strongest. There is little sense in building a separate large flame for food if the same heat can cook. Dry materials, warm stones, and provide comfort simultaneously. Ancient efficiency often comes from combining tasks rather than treating each one separately. The group may also change its behaviour as fuel becomes scarce. People sit closer together. Openings are sealed more carefully. Unnecessary trips outside are reduced. Clothing remains on even while resting. Heat conservation becomes increasingly important because every unit of warmth saved is fuel that does not need to be burned. No agreement has been reached on whether some Ice Age groups routinely stockpiled very large fuel reserves at seasonal camps or gathered material more continuously. Archaeological charcoal concentrations can show repeated burning, but they rarely reveal the complete logistics of collection. Fuel may have been carried from the considerable distances, gathered during daily travel, or stored in quantities that left little direct trace. Transport itself has a cost. A heavy bundle of wood requires energy to carry. If suitable fuel lies far from camp, people must decide whether the warmth gained is worth the calories spent collecting it. This trade-off becomes especially important in deep snow or strong wind. A lightweight bundle of dry branches may be more valuable than a heavier load of damp timber. You watch someone split a thicker piece of wood to expose the dry interior. The outer surface is damp, but the heartwood catches more easily once revealed. Another person shaves thin curls from the edge to create kindling. Skill turns one poor piece of fuel into several useful forms. The smell of the shelter changes as different materials burn. Wood smoke is joined by the heavier scent of bone and dried organic matter. The fire no longer looks impressive, but it remains steady. That steadiness is the achievement. Ancient humans do not need endless fuel. They need enough fuel used wisely. Dry wood is protected. Damp wood is prepared. Bone is reused. Dung becomes combustible. Stones store heat, and every flame is kept smaller than panic might demand. Scarcity does not automatically mean failure, because knowledge can stretch a limited resource far beyond what careless use would allow. You look at the remaining pile and realize that it no longer seems frighteningly small. It simply looks measured. Each piece represents another interval of warmth, another meal, another hour of useful light. In a deadly blizzard, survival can depend on this quiet arithmetic of heat, where nothing burns without purpose and almost nothing capable of burning is ignored. You step into a world where direction has almost vanished. Snow moves sideways across your face, the ground and sky seem to blend together, and familiar landmarks disappear behind a pale curtain. In such conditions, getting lost can happen with frightening speed. Ancient humans caught outside during a blizzard must rely on memory, terrain, sound, touch, and careful judgment, because once visibility collapses, even a well-known landscape can become unfamiliar. The first danger is continuing too quickly. When the horizon disappears, your sense of direction becomes unreliable, especially across open ground. Without fixed landmarks, you may drift gradually to one side while believing you are walking straight. Ancient travelers who know this risk may slow down, shorten their route, or stop completely rather than pressing forward blindly. You place one foot carefully ahead of the other and feel the surface change beneath you. Snow depth becomes information. A firmer patch may indicate a wind-scoured ridge, while deeper drifts can collect in hollows or on the sheltered side of obstacles. The ground is no longer something you merely cross, it becomes something you read through your legs and feet. Records confirm that hunter-gatherers can develop extraordinarily detailed spatial knowledge of their territories, including water sources, animal paths, seasonal camps, ridges, river crossings, and distinctive rock formations. In prehistoric landscapes, such memory would have been essential because there were no signs, marked roads, or written maps to guide to travel. A remembered route is not simply a line between 2 points, it is a sequence of features. You expect a slope to rise under your feet, then a stand of trees, then a shallow stream, then a rocky outcrop. If one feature fails to appear, you know something is wrong. Navigation becomes a chain of confirmations rather than one continuous guess. Sound can help when sight fails. Running water beneath the ice may produce a low murmur. Trees groan differently from open ground. Wind sounds harsher on an exposed ridge and softer inside dense woodland. A distant river, cliff, or grove can alter the way noise travels, giving clues to location even when visibility is poor. You turn your head and listen. One side of the world carries a steady rush through branches, while the other sounds strangely empty. That difference may be enough to suggest the direction of a forest edge. It is not precise, but in a storm, precision is less important than avoiding a dangerous mistake. Touch becomes another guide. A familiar rock wall can be followed by the hand. The rough bark of one tree species may tell you that you have reached a known woodland. A slope felt beneath the feet may confirm whether you are descending toward a valley or climbing towards the exposed ground. Oddly enough, people can sometimes navigate more effectively by deliberately reducing speed and increasing attention to these small signals. Panic encourages rapid movement, but rapid movement produces less information and more mistakes. A slower traveller notices changes in snow texture, wind direction, slope, and vegetation that a frightened person may miss entirely. The problem becomes more serious when wind changes direction. Many travellers use prevailing wind as a rough reference, but a storm can shift. If you assume the wind is still coming from the same quarter when it has veered, your entire mental map can rotate without you noticing. Ancient people therefore benefit from combining several clues rather than trusting one. A curious footnote is that humans have poor natural ability to maintain a straight path without visual references. Experiments with modern walkers show that people can begin circling when deprived of stable cues. Prehistoric travellers would not need an experiment to learn the lesson. Getting lost once in fog, snow, or darkness would make the danger memorable enough. You also watch for animal tracks. Though a blizzard may erase them quickly, fresh tracks can indicate movement towards shelter, water, or lower ground. Herd animals often know routes through difficult terrain better than unfamiliar humans. Following tracks can sometimes help, but it can also lead away from camp, so knowledge of local species and behaviour matters. Scholars still argue whether prehistoric groups used formal route markers such as arranged stones, carved signs, deliberately broken branches, or other signals in dangerous landscapes. Some objects may have served navigational purposes, but proving that intention is extremely difficult. Organic markers would usually disappear, and stone arrangements can have many explanations. You reach a low ridge and crouch because standing exposes you to stronger gusts. The slope under your knees feels familiar. You remember that the safer route lies along the base rather than across the top. This kind of memory is not abstract geography, it is stored experience attached to bodily sensation. If several people are travelling together, staying close becomes critical. A person who disappears behind blowing snow may be difficult to find even a few moments later. The group can maintain contact by touch, voice, or a simple line of movement. One person leads while others follow the sound or shape directly ahead. Communication becomes stripped down to essentials: a shouted name, a hand gripping an arm, a brief signal to stop. Long conversation is useless when wind tears words apart. Ancient survival in a whiteout depends on simple signals understood instantly. You feel someone touch your shoulder, and the contact is reassuring because it confirms the group is still together. The person behind you does the same. Human beings become landmarks for one another when the landscape stops providing them. There is also wisdom in deciding not to travel at all. If orientation is uncertain and shelter is possible nearby, stopping can be safer than wandering into worse terrain. A hollow and tree line, or sheltered depression, may offer enough protection to wait until visibility improves. Movement feels productive, but survival sometimes requires resisting the urge to keep going. The temptation to continue is strong when you believe the destination is close. A camp may seem only a short distance away, yet distance becomes impossible to judge in blowing snow. 10 minutes of mistaken direction can create a much larger problem. Ancient travellers who know the terrain deeply may recognise when certainty has disappeared, and treat uncertainty itself as a warning. Snow can also hide hazards: thin river ice, steep drops, fallen branches, and holes vanish beneath an even white surface. Probing ahead with a staff or long branch can reveal sudden changes before your full weight reaches them. A simple stick becomes both walking aid and safety tool. You press the end of a branch into the snow before stepping forward. Sometimes it meets firm ground, sometimes it sinks farther than expected. That small test prevents the sort of dramatic surprise that nobody wants in freezing weather. Travel pace must conserve energy as well. High stepping through deep snow quickly exhausts muscles. Breaking trail for a group is especially tiring, so people can rotate the lid position. Each new leader pushes through untouched snow while others follow in the compressed path, reducing effort for everyone behind. Mainstream historical evidence from later cold weather societies shows that route knowledge, snow conditions, wind awareness, and shared travel practices can become highly refined cultural skills. These examples cannot be copied directly into deep prehistory, but they demonstrate how people without modern navigation tools can move safely through environments that outsiders find confusing. You continue only because several clues agree. The slope is correct. The trees appear where expected. The wind sounds different near the woodland edge. Your feet encounter firmer ground that matches a remembered path. None of these signs would be enough alone, but together they rebuild direction. The storm still hides the distance, yet the landscape slowly becomes legible again. Navigation in a blizzard is not about possessing one magical instinct. It is about layering memory, terrain, sound, touch, tracks, and caution until uncertainty becomes manageable. Ancient humans survive being lost, not because they always know exactly where they are, but because they learn how to avoid turning doubt into disaster. You notice first that the cold has changed from discomfort into something more serious. Fingers no longer ache in the ordinary way. Instead, they feel strangely wooden, and the skin seems less responsive when touched. A companion rubs one hand against the other, but the movement is clumsy and uncertain. Ancient humans do not possess modern medical terminology, yet they can still recognize when cold begins damaging the body, because dangerous chilling produces visible patterns that experienced people learn to fear. Frostbite begins when tissues freeze, especially in exposed or poorly protected areas such as fingers, toes, ears, cheeks, and nose. Blood vessels narrow in cold conditions to preserve warmth around the heart and other vital organs, leaving extremities increasingly vulnerable. Skin may become pale, numb, stiff, or unusually waxy. Once sensation fades, the injured person may underestimate the severity of the problem because pain is no longer providing useful warning. You take the chilled hand gently rather than squeezing it. The fingers feel colder than your own and move poorly. The immediate instinct might be to rub them vigorously, but hard rubbing can damage frozen tissue further. A more careful approach is gradual warming, while protecting the injured area from additional exposure. Ancient people who repeatedly face severe winters may have learned such lessons through experience, even without understanding the microscopic injury beneath the skin. Records confirm that later cold weather communities developed practical methods for managing freezing injuries through shelter, insulation, controlled warming, and protection from repeated freezing. This does not prove that every prehistoric group followed identical procedures, but the underlying signs are visible enough that generations living in harsh climates could recognize useful responses. Hypothermia is different because it affects the temperature of the whole body rather than one frozen area. At first, a chilled person may shiver strongly as muscles generate heat. Movement becomes awkward, speech may slow, judgment deteriorates. If cooling continues, shivering can eventually weaken or stop, which is especially dangerous because the person may appear calmer at the moment their condition is becoming worse. You watch a companion struggle to fasten a simple cord they normally handle easily. Their hands miss the knot, their expression seems distant. This change in behaviour can become a crucial signal. A person experiencing hypothermia may insist they are fine because confusion itself interferes with self-judgment. Others must sometimes make the decision for them. The safest response begins by preventing further heat loss. Wet or snow-covered outer layers are removed if dry replacements are available. The person is protected from cold ground and moving air. Warm coverings are added around the torso, neck, and head. Heat is restored gradually rather than through sudden extremes. A fire can help, but simply placing someone extremely close to fierce heat is not necessarily ideal. Rapid heating of the skin while the core remains cold can produce uncomfortable circulation changes, and burns are possible when numb skin cannot sense excessive temperature. Warmth applied steadily to the centre of the body is safer than roasting frozen hands directly beside flames like unfortunate pieces of dinner. Oddly enough, someone with severely chilled skin may not realise how hot a warming object has become. Numbness removes the warning sensation that normally makes you pull away. Heated stones, warm containers, or cloths therefore need to be tested by another person before being placed near damaged skin. A method intended to save tissue can otherwise create a new injury. You wrap a warm object in hide before placing it near the chest of the chilled person. The warmth is gentle rather than intense. Their breathing remains slow, but they respond when spoken to. Someone offers a warm drink once they are alert enough to swallow safely. Sweet or fatty food may also help provide energy for the body to generate heat. Alcohol would be a poor choice. Despite the old image of strong drink creating warmth in cold conditions, alcohol can make skin feel warmer because blood vessels near the surface widen, but that can increase heat loss from the body. Ancient humans do not have distilled spirits in the deep prehistoric periods under discussion anyway, which neatly removes that particular bad decision from the menu. A curious footnote is that warming techniques in cold regions sometimes involve direct body contact. A chilled person may be placed close to others beneath shared coverings so that surrounding bodies provide steady heat. This method is simple, requires no special equipment, and avoids the intense local heat that can burn numb skin. Herbal knowledge may also play a role in treating discomfort, swelling, pain, or damaged skin. Though direct evidence for specific prehistoric remedies is limited, people living closely with plants often learn which leaves, resins, roots, or infusions soothe wounds or inflammation. Some substances may have offered real benefits, while others probably work mainly because someone believed confidently in them. A tradition humanity has maintained with impressive consistency. Scholars still argue whether certain plant remains found at prehistoric sites represent deliberate medicinal use or simply food, fuel, bedding, or accidental inclusion. One plant near a skeleton does not automatically become medicine. Yet evidence from later traditional societies shows that detailed botanical knowledge can exist without writing, making prehistoric medicinal practice entirely plausible even when archaeology cannot reconstruct every remedy. Cold injuries also create difficult decisions about movement. A person with numb feet may be able to walk temporarily, but continued pressure on damaged tissue can worsen injury. On the other hand, remaining still in exposed conditions may be even more dangerous. Ancient groups have to balance two risks without perfect information, choosing whether to move towards safety or protect the injured limb where they are. You imagine a traveller whose toes have become numb inside damp footwear. Companions inspect the feet once shelter is reached and discover patches of pale skin. The footwear is removed carefully rather than yanked away. Dry insulation is added, and the feet are warmed slowly. Nobody can guarantee recovery, but careful handling improves the chance that the tissue survives. Repeated freezing is especially dangerous. If a hand or foot is thawed and then exposed to freezing conditions again, damage can become worse. This creates a practical rule: warming an injured extremity is most useful when the person can remain protected afterward. If another long journey through extreme cold is unavoidable, decisions become more complicated. Ancient people may recognize this pattern from experience. Someone who warmed frozen toes only to march immediately into another storm might fare worse than someone whose feet remained protected until a safe camp was reached. Such observations become part of communal memory, passed along as warning rather than written instruction. The body's response to hypothermia can also look deceptively strange. Confusion may cause a chilled person to make poor choices, wander or resist help. Severe cases can involve unusual behaviour that seems irrational to companions. The lesson is important because cold does not merely weaken muscles, it can alter decision-making itself. You speak calmly to the person being warmed, keeping them engaged without forcing unnecessary movement. Their shivering begins to return more strongly, which can be an encouraging sign if they remain conscious and protected. Warmth spreads slowly rather than dramatically. Recovery from dangerous chilling is often quiet work. Mainstream medical understanding today makes clear that gradual rewarming, insulation, dry clothing, protection from additional freezing are central principles in cold injury care. Prehistoric communities would not know the physiology in modern terms, but they could still observe cause and effect. People who handled freezing injuries badly would see worse outcomes. People who discovered gentler methods could remember and repeat them. The psychological side matters too. A frightened, injured person may waste energy struggling or attempting to stand too soon. Reassurance can encourage stillness and cooperation. Human care therefore includes voice, touch, and presence as well as material treatment. A hand resting steadily on someone's shoulder can communicate that they are being watched and protected. The smell around you has become a mixture of warm hide, damp leather, crushed leaves, and faint wood smoke. The person's fingers gradually become more flexible. Colour returns unevenly to the skin. There may be pain as sensation comes back, which is unpleasant but can also indicate that tissue is still responding. No treatment is perfect, and ancient people certainly lose fingers, toes, and sometimes lives to severe cold. Survival in Ice Age environments does not mean immunity to winter injury. It means that communities develop enough practical knowledge to improve the odds when injury occurs. You begin to see prehistoric medicine not as a separate profession, but as accumulated observation. Someone remembers how a frozen hand looked. Someone recalls which warming method caused less damage. Someone knows which plant reduced swelling. Someone recognizes that a confused person should not be left alone. That knowledge travels through stories, demonstrations, and repeated care. It sits in memory until the next crisis makes it useful. In a world without hospitals or written manuals, the group itself becomes the treatment system. Warmth, patience, attention, and experience combine to give a chilled human body the chance to recover from a cold that has already begun reaching beneath the skin. You step into a landscape transformed by fresh snow, and hunting suddenly becomes both easier and more dangerous. The storm has hidden old trails, softened distant sounds, and covered familiar ground beneath a clean white surface. But it has also preserved the movements of every animal that has crossed since the snowfall eased. Tracks that might disappear into dry soil or leaf litter now stand out sharply. And for ancient hunters, this new clarity can turn the morning after a blizzard into an opportunity. You look down and see a line of impressions cutting across the snow. The prints are deep, their edges still crisp, and tiny crumbs of loose snow remain scattered around them. Freshness matters. Older tracks soften as wind fills them. Sunlight rounds their edges, and new snowfall blurs their shape. A skilled hunter learns to judge not only which animal passed, but how recently it moved through. Records confirm that prehistoric humans hunted a wide range of large and medium-sized animals, including reindeer, horse, bison, deer, and other species depending on region and period. Animal bones bearing cut marks, impact damage, and evidence of systematic butchery show that hunting was often organised and technically skilled. Snow could add another layer of information to that skill by making animal movement visible across broad distances. You follow the prints slowly. Each one tells you something. The spacing between tracks suggests whether the animal walked, trotted, or ran. The depth may hint at body weight or soft ground beneath the snow. A sudden cluster of marks can show where the animal paused, turned, or struggled through a drift. Snow also preserves subtler signs. A low branch may carry fresh hairs. Bark may show where an animal rubbed against a tree. Urine can stain the snow, and droppings can remain warm enough briefly to reveal how recently the animal passed. Even a small patch of disturbed surface can become useful when combined with everything else. For a moment, it feels as though the landscape has become a book written overnight. The difficulty is that you must read it correctly. A print partly filled with drifting snow might look older than it really is. Tracks crossing one another can create confusion. Wind can sculpt strange shapes that resemble animal signs from a distance. You kneel and touch the edge of one print with a gloved finger. The snow is still loose rather than crusted. Nearby, a second track disappears beneath powder, blown from a small ridge. You're not merely following footprints, you're reconstructing movement, direction, speed, and intention from fragments. A curious footnote is that experienced trackers can sometimes recognize individual animals from repeated peculiarities in stride or hoof shape. One hoof may be chipped, one leg may produce a slightly uneven rhythm, or an animal may favor a particular path. Whether prehistoric hunters regularly identified individual animals in this way cannot be proven, but close familiarity with local herds makes the possibility entirely reasonable. Blizzards alter animal behavior as much as human behavior. Large herbivores may seek sheltered valleys, forest edges, or areas where wind has stripped snow away from vegetation. Deep snow can make movement difficult, especially when a crust forms at the surface. Animals that normally outrun human hunters may become slower or more predictable in certain conditions. That does not make hunting easy. Deep snow exhausts people too. Every step can sink to the ankle, knee, or higher. Legs lift repeatedly against resistance, and balance becomes awkward when the surface collapses unpredictably. Chasing an animal recklessly through drifts can waste more energy than the meat would replace. The hunters therefore benefit from patience. Instead of pursuing at full speed, they may follow at a sustainable pace, using the animal's own trail where possible. A larger animal presses snow beneath its feet, leaving a path that can be easier to walk than untouched ground. The hunter effectively borrows the animal's labour, which is a pleasingly efficient arrangement from one side of the relationship. Wind direction matters now for a different reason. Animals with strong senses of smell may detect humans long before they see them. Approaching from downwind reduces the chance of scent carrying toward the quarry. Fresh snow can muffle footsteps, but one snapping branch or scrape of equipment can still end the hunt quickly. You become aware of every sound you make. Leather creaks, snow compresses beneath your footwear, a wooden shaft lightly taps against another tool. Silence is never complete, but movement can be controlled, and ancient hunters who depend on close-range weapons have powerful reasons to move carefully. Mainstream archaeological evidence shows that prehistoric hunters used thrusting spears, thrown spears, projectile points, traps, and cooperative drives at different times and places. Some hunting strategies depended on getting remarkably close to large animals. Snow can help conceal movement, but it can also expose the hunter as a dark figure against a bright oaked surface. Terrain becomes part of the strategy. A herd moving beside a steep bank, narrow ravine, frozen marsh, or deep drift may have fewer escape routes. Hunters can use natural barriers to guide movement rather than relying only on speed. Cooperative hunting allows several people to influence the direction of animals and concentrate them toward a more favourable position. Scholars still argue whether certain mass kill sites represent carefully planned communal drives, repeated opportunistic hunts, or combinations of both. Animal bone concentrations can be dramatic, but reconstructing exactly how the animals were brought to a location is often difficult. Snow would leave no lasting archaeological trace even if it played a central role in the hunt. You notice another advantage created by fresh snowfall. Blood trails, broken vegetation, and disturbed snow can make a wounded animal easier to follow. Ancient hunters using stone-tipped weapons may not always kill instantly, so tracking after a successful strike can be essential. Losing an injured animal means losing precious food and wasting the effort already spent. The pursuit can still become dangerous. A wounded bison, deer, or other large animal may defend itself. Snow can hide rocks and roots beneath the hunter's feet. Frozen streams may look solid while concealing weaker ice. A successful tracker must remain attentive to the ground even while focusing on the quarry. Oddly enough, bright snow can create misleading impressions of distance. A dark animal standing across a white plain may appear closer or farther than expected because the usual visual cues are reduced. Hunters who throw or thrust weapons need accurate distance judgment, so approaching slowly can matter more than dramatic speed. Your mind drifts toward a small herd feeding where the wind has exposed patches of vegetation. Their hooves scrape aside loose snow, revealing stems beneath. The animals are hungry after the storm, and hunger can make their behaviour more predictable. They remain near places where food is easiest to reach. Predators notice the same opportunities. Wolves, large cats, and scavengers may also follow weakened animals or investigate carcasses. A successful human hunt can therefore attract competition. Butchering quickly and transporting the most valuable portions becomes important, especially if returning later would mean finding very little left. Cold weather helps preserve the carcass, but it also makes processing harder. Hide stiffens, fat becomes firm, hands lose dexterity if exposed for too long. Stone blades must be kept sharp because frozen tissue resists cutting. Hunters may perform only the most necessary work at the kill site and carry selected portions to a safer location. You smell the metallic scent of fresh meat mixing with snow and cold air. Steam may rise faintly from a newly opened carcass, a startling warmth in an otherwise frozen landscape. The contrast reminds you that successful hunting brings more than food. Hide can become clothing or covering. Sinew can become thread and bindings, bone can become tools, and fat can become fuel as well as nourishment. The return journey demands its own calculation. Meat is heavy, and deep snow makes every load harder to carry. People may divide the carcass into manageable portions, use simple dragging devices where available, or make several trips. The greatest success can become a problem if the group cannot transport what it has obtained. A fresh blizzard can erase all evidence of abundance in hours, so hunters work with urgency but not panic. Valuable cuts are protected, tools are gathered, and the route home is chosen carefully. The tracks leading outward may still be visible, offering a familiar path back across the transformed terrain. You begin to understand why the end of a storm can produce a brief window of opportunity. Snow reveals movement. Animals seek predictable shelter and feeding areas, and tracks become easier to follow. At the same time, the hunter must manage deep drifts, exhaustion, hidden hazards, predators, and rapidly changing weather. Ancient hunting in winter is therefore not a heroic chase across an empty white plain. It is patient interpretation. You read hoofprints, wind, feeding marks, broken crust, and the shape of valleys. You calculate energy against reward. You move only when the signs justify it. Fresh snow makes the landscape quieter, but it also makes it more communicative. Every animal leaves a temporary story behind, pressed into the surface one step at a time. For the people who know how to read those stories, a deadly winter storm can leave not only hardship in its wake, but the possibility of food, material, and another stretch of survival written clearly across the snow. You begin to understand that surviving winter is easier when you are not forced to endure its worst conditions in the worst possible place. Ancient humans do not simply remain fixed while snow deepens around them. Many groups move through landscapes according to season, following animals, water, fuel, shelter, and changes in weather. Winter survival therefore becomes partly a question of geography. Where you choose to spend the coldest months can matter as much as what you wear or eat. Seasonal movement does not necessarily mean constant wandering. A group may remain for weeks or months in one favoured area, then shift when resources decline or conditions change. Rivers freeze, herds move, plants disappear beneath snow, and exposed uplands become difficult to cross. A place that is excellent in summer may become miserable in winter. Ancient people learned to treat the landscape as something that changes personality with the seasons. Records confirm that many prehistoric hunter-gatherer groups moved between different locations during the year rather than living permanently in one settlement. Archaeologists infer this through animal remains, raw materials, seasonal growth patterns, and repeated occupation of different site types. Some camps appear linked to hunting, others to longer stays, and some may have been used only during particular times of year. You picture a broad river valley bordered by hills. In warmer months, people travel widely across open country. In winter, the valley offers several advantages. Water may remain accessible in places. Trees provide fuel, cliffs reduce wind, and animals may concentrate nearby. A group that knows these patterns can move toward the valley before conditions become severe. Animal migration is one of the most important influences. Reindeer, horse, bison, and other large herbivores often move seasonally in response to food, snow depth, breeding cycles, and temperature. People who depend heavily on these animals cannot ignore their movements. Following the herd may provide meat and raw materials, but following too far into exposed territory can create new dangers. This creates a delicate decision. You want to remain close enough to animals to hunt effectively, yet not so close to their route that the group ends up trapped in poor shelter. Ancient mobility requires balancing food against protection. The best winter camp may not be where animals are most abundant, but where animals are accessible without forcing people to cross dangerous ground every day. For a moment, your mind drifts toward the work of moving camp. Hides are rolled, tools gathered, food packed, children kept close, and valuable materials divided among those who can carry them. Nothing is light simply because it is prehistoric. A hide bundle soaked with moisture becomes heavy. Stone tools add weight quickly, and dried meat must be carried carefully if it represents several days of food. Travel in winter is expensive in energy. Deep snow slows progress, cold increases metabolic demands, and shorter daylight limits useful travel time. This means distance must be judged conservatively. A journey that feels easy in autumn can become exhausting once every step sinks into powder or crust. Oddly enough, snow can sometimes make movement easier under the right conditions. A firm crust may support weight, frozen marshes can become passable, and rivers may offer flat routes where summer travel would require detours. Ancient people who know when ice is reliable can exploit winter rather than merely endure it. The same season that blocks one path can open another. A curious footnote appears in the use of simple transport devices. Archaeological evidence for prehistoric sleds and snowshoes is patchy because wood and hide decay. Yet such technologies are plausible in many cold environments and are well known from later northern societies. Even a basic dragging frame can reduce the difficulty of carrying meat, hides, or camp equipment across snow, especially when the surface is smooth. You feel the difference immediately when a load is dragged rather than lifted. Weight still resists movement, but shoulders are spared some of the strain. A narrow runner or simple frame can slide across packed snow more efficiently than the same burden carried on the back. If such devices were used deep in prehistory, many would have vanished completely from the archaeological record. Route choice matters just as much as transport. A straight line across exposed upland may be shorter, but far more dangerous than a longer path through forest or valley. Ancient travellers can reduce wind exposure by following sheltered terrain. Even if the journey takes extra time, efficiency is measured in energy and safety rather than distance alone. You move along the lower side of a ridge where trees break the wind. Above you, the crest is white and bare. The direct route lies over the top, but the group stays beneath it. The choice adds distance, yet saves warmth and strength. Ancient mobility often depends on accepting the slower path because the slower path keeps everyone functioning. Scholars still argue whether some Ice Age populations were highly mobile throughout winter, or whether severe cold encouraged longer seasonal residence at favoured camps. Evidence varies by region. Some sites suggest repeated movement across large territories, while others indicate extended use of resource-rich locations. Climate, prey, population size, and local geography probably produced many different patterns rather than one universal strategy. Winter movement also depends on social knowledge. A distant shelter is useful only if someone remembers where it is. A frozen crossing is safe only if people know its seasonal behaviour. A valley containing fuel and game matters only if that information has been passed through the group. Maps exist in memory, reinforced by stories and repeated journeys. You imagine an elder describing a route with no drawn line at all. Travel until the dark cliff appears on your left. Follow the stream until the trees become dense. Avoid the hollow where snow collects deeply. Cross the river near the broad bend where the current is slower. Such instructions can be precise without being written. Seasonal planning may begin long before winter. A group can position itself near reliable resources during autumn, reducing the distance that must be travelled later. Food may be gathered in places that are easier to defend from scavengers. Useful fuel can be collected near winter camps. Paths can be remembered and equipment repaired while conditions remain forgiving. This forward planning separates emergency movement from deliberate movement. Being forced to flee a bad location during a storm is dangerous. Choosing a good winter territory before storms become common is far safer. Ancient humans survive partly because they anticipate recurring seasonal problems rather than treating every cold spell as a surprise. Children and older adults affect mobility as well. A group cannot plan only for its fastest walkers. Rest stops, carrying loads, and distance must account for everyone. This can encourage shorter stages between known camps or greater use of routes with reliable shelter. Mobility is not simply individual athletic ability, it is a group problem. The smell of the landscape changes as you move from open plain into wooded lowland. Resin and damp bark replace the dry scent of wind-blown snow. Animal tracks become more frequent near sheltered feeding areas. Water sounds beneath ice. The environment feels less empty because resources cluster together. You begin to see why certain places draw repeated winter occupation. A good location does not need to be perfect, it only needs enough advantages in combination. Fuel nearby, manageable wind, access to animals, drinkable water, and routes that remain passable can create a practical seasonal refuge. Mainstream archaeological research supports the idea that prehistoric mobility was often structured rather than random. People revisited familiar places, transported raw materials across considerable distances, and organised movement around predictable resources. Even without permanent houses or roads, their territories could be known in extraordinary detail. The coldest season therefore becomes a problem of timing as much as endurance. Move too late, and snow closes the route. Move too early, and resources elsewhere may be abandoned unnecessarily. Stay too long, and local food or fuel may decline. Every decision is adjusted through experience. You continue through the valley at a steady pace, carrying only what matters most. The route curves rather than cutting straight across the land, but each bend avoids a colder, steeper, or more exposed place. Ancient humans do not survive Ice Age winters by remaining stubbornly wherever they happen to be. They survive by learning when to stay, when to move, and which parts of the landscape offer the best bargain between food, shelter, effort, and safety. You kneel beside a shallow patch of ancient ground and realise that most of what once mattered has vanished. The voices are gone, the hides are gone, The wooden frames are gone, and even the snow that shaped so many decisions left no direct trace. What remains are fragment stone flakes, burned bone, charcoal and stains in soil, animal remains, broken tools, and occasional patterns that suggest where people sat, worked, slept, cooked, or sheltered from bitter weather. Archaeology begins with these leftovers. A hearth may appear as darkened sediment mixed with ash and charcoal. Around it, stone tools can cluster in ways that hint at repeated activity. Burned fragments may reveal cooking or fuel use. Cut marks on animal bones can show butchery. While broken long bones may indicate deliberate marrow extraction, each object is small, but together they can reconstruct a surprisingly detailed winter scene. Records confirm that prehistoric sites across cold regions preserve repeated evidence of fire use, animal processing, stone tool manufacture, and organised occupation. In some locations, hearths appear again and again in layered deposits, suggesting that people return to the same sheltered places over long periods. A single fire stain becomes part of a larger pattern of seasonal familiarity. You brush loose sediment from a cluster of stones arranged around a patch of ash. Their position looks intentional. Some surfaces show heat alteration, and the soil beneath them is reddened. The fire itself disappeared thousands of years ago, yet its temperature changed the ground enough to leave a visible memory. Charcoal can sometimes tell archaeologists what kinds of wood were burned. Tiny fragments preserve cellular structures that allow identification of species or broader plant groups. If one type of tree dominates a hearth, it may reflect availability, preference, or both. Fuel choices can therefore reveal something about the surrounding environment as well as human behaviour. Animal bones provide another layer of evidence. The species present can suggest climate and season. Reindeer, horse, bison, deer, and smaller animals each carry ecological information. If particular age groups or body parts dominate, researchers may infer hunting strategy, carcass transport, or the time of year when animals were taken. Seasonality is especially valuable because it can help identify winter occupation. Teeth grow in patterns, antlers develop and are shed at particular times, and bones change as young animals mature. By studying these features, archaeologists can sometimes estimate whether an animal died in winter, spring, summer, or autumn. A curious footnote is that ancient teeth can preserve tiny chemical records of seasonal diet and movement. Variations in isotopes across tooth enamel may reveal changes in environment while the tooth was forming. What looks like an ordinary tooth can therefore contain a timeline of landscape use far more detailed than its appearance suggests. You hold a small stone flake between two fingers. It is sharp enough to have cut hide, meat, or plant fibre, yet its exact task is not obvious. Microscopic wear along the edge can sometimes solve the mystery. Polishing, scratches, and tiny fractures develop differently depending on whether a tool worked skin, wood, bone, or meat. Use-wear analysis is valuable for understanding cold survival because hide processing tools can point toward clothing production and shelter maintenance. A scraper associated with animal remains and hearths may help build a larger argument about how people prepared skins. The tool alone does not prove a fur coat existed, but patterns across many objects can make that interpretation stronger. Residue analysis adds another possibility. Traces of fat, plant material, pigment, or adhesive can sometimes survive on stone surfaces. These remains are difficult to preserve and easy to contaminate, so researchers handle them cautiously. Still, the smallest chemical stain may reveal an activity that left no visible artifact behind. Scholars bicker over how confidently individual prehistoric structures can be reconstructed from scattered post holes, stone rings, or bone arrangements. One researcher may see a substantial dwelling with a framed roof, while another sees a lighter windbreak or temporary work area. The same pattern can support several explanations, especially when organic walls and coverings have disappeared. This uncertainty is not a weakness so much as a feature of studying deep time. Archaeologists rarely receive complete rooms preserved exactly as people left them. They work from probabilities, comparisons, experimental reconstruction, and repeated patterns. The story becomes stronger when several independent clues point in the same direction. You notice a shallow concentration of red pigment near a cluster of tools. Ochre appears frequently at prehistoric sites and may have served symbolic, practical, or mixed purposes. It can be used in hide processing, colouring, adhesives, body decoration, and other activities. One bright patch in the soil therefore opens several possibilities rather than one tidy answer. Oddly enough, ancient camps can sometimes be mapped through the distribution of rubbish. People tend to throw bones, broken tools, and food waste in particular places rather than everywhere equally. Refuse zones can help archaeologists distinguish working areas from sleeping or cooking areas, even when no walls survive. Trash, it seems, has always been deeply informative. Sediment itself matters. Soil layers can record flooding, windblown dust, freeze-thaw cycles, and periods when a shelter was occupied or abandoned. Microscopic fragments of plants, ash, and bone reveal activities invisible to the naked eye. A floor that looks dull and brown may contain thousands of tiny clues. You can almost sense the vanished camp emerging through these traces. A darker patch suggests a hearth. Stone flakes cluster nearby where tools were sharpened. Animal bone fragments accumulate farther away. A compacted area with fewer sharp objects may have been used for resting. None of this is certain in isolation, but the arrangement begins to feel intentional. Mainstream archaeological fact rests heavily on context. An artifact removed from its original position loses much of its meaning. A stone point in a museum case is interesting, but a stone point found beside a hearth, animal bones, and hide working tools becomes part of a behaviour pattern. Location turns objects into evidence. Cold environments can occasionally preserve organic materials unusually well. Frozen ground, caves, dry conditions, and waterlogged sediments sometimes protect wood, fibre, leather, hair, or plant remains that would normally decay. These rare finds are extraordinarily valuable because they reveal technologies usually missing from the archaeological record. When a fragment of cordage survives, it proves knowledge of twisting fibres. When a shaped wooden object survives, it reveals carpentry skill. When preserved plant bedding appears, it confirms that people deliberately modified sleeping surfaces. Organic discoveries can transform interpretations built previously from stone and bone alone. No agreement has been reached on how much cold weather technology has disappeared completely because it was made from perishable materials. Snow tools, wooden frames, hide bags, woven containers, footwear, sled components, and insulating plant layers may have been common yet archaeologically invisible. Researchers therefore have to resist equating absence of evidence with evidence of absence. Experimental archaeology offers another approach. Researchers reproduce ancient tools, process hides, build shelters, burn different fuels, and test how materials behave under realistic conditions. The goal is not to recreate one exact prehistoric evening, which would be impossible, but to understand what certain technologies can accomplish. You can imagine a reconstructed hide shelter tested in freezing wind. Researchers measure temperature, airflow, fuel use, and condensation. A structure that seems flimsy in a museum drawing may prove surprisingly effective once assembled properly. Practical testing can reveal advantages that are not obvious from artifacts alone. Microscopic evidence can even preserve traces of occupation too faint for ordinary excavation. Ash particles, phytoliths from plants, fragments of hair, starch grains, and mineral residues can survive beneath floors or within hearths. Entire categories of activity become visible only when samples are studied at extremely small scales. The archaeological picture remains incomplete, yet incomplete does not mean vague. thousands of sites, millions of artifacts, animal remains, chemical signatures, and environmental records overlap. Together they show that ancient humans were technically inventive, socially organized, and deeply responsive to local conditions. You rise from the excavation surface and look across the quiet landscape. Nothing obvious remains of the people who once occupied it. There are no standing walls, no smoke rising from roofs, no footprints crossing snow, yet beneath a thin layer of earth, their choices persist as patterns. A hearth says that warmth was managed. A scraper says that material was worked. A fractured bone says that food was processed efficiently. A post hole says that something was built. A seasonal animal remain says that people were present when the weather was cold. Piece by piece, archaeology turns absence into evidence and allows you to glimpse how human beings met winter with skill rather than helplessness. You stand beneath a sky that has finally begun to lighten, and the ancient winter world seems almost impossibly quiet. Snow lies across the land in smooth folds, covering footprints, broken branches, and the scattered evidence of human movement. Somewhere nearby, a group of people wakes slowly, stretches stiff limbs, checks tools, touches clothing, and looks outward toward the pale horizon. Their survival does not feel like a dramatic victory. It feels quieter than that, more ordinary, and perhaps more remarkable because of it. They are alive because countless small decisions have held together. Human beings are not naturally impressive winter animals. You have no thick permanent fur, no specialised paws for crossing deep snow, and no instinctive ability to sleep safely through months of cold. Your exposed skin loses heat quickly, your feet can freeze, and your need for food remains demanding. Yet people spread into some of the coldest inhabited landscapes on Earth because evolution gave them another collection of advantages: dexterous hands, flexible intelligence, long memory, language, cooperation, and the ability to alter behaviour faster than bodies can biologically adapt. Records confirm that humans occupied demanding cold environments during the Pleistocene, including regions affected by repeated glacial cycles and severe climatic fluctuations. Populations adapted to changing conditions rather than waiting for the climate to become convenient. That ability to live across deserts, mountains, forests, grasslands, coasts, and frozen regions eventually became one of the defining characteristics of humanity. You look at a stone tool resting in someone's palm and consider how modest it appears. It has no moving parts, it does not glow, calculate, or announce that an update is available at an inconvenient moment. Yet in skilled hands, such a tool can cut meat, shape wood, prepare hide, sharpen a point, and help produce many other objects. Human technology often works through chains of transformation, where one simple tool helps create another solution. The most important technology may be knowledge itself. A person learns which materials remain flexible in cold weather, how long food lasts, where animals gather during deep snow, and which signs indicate dangerous weather. These lessons accumulate across years. They do not need to be written to become sophisticated. Language allows such experience to travel farther than individual memory. A dangerous event can become a story. A successful technique can become instruction. Someone can explain a place another person has never visited, or warn a child about conditions they have not yet experienced. Humans do not need every generation to rediscover winter from the beginning, which would be an exhausting educational policy. Your mind drifts toward a child listening, while an older person speaks. The child may hear about an unusual storm, an animal route, or some mistake made many seasons ago. Perhaps the story is exaggerated slightly because humans have presumably been improving stories for as long as stories have existed. Beneath the entertaining details, though, practical information remains. A curious footnote is that cultural adaptation can sometimes change far faster than physical evolution. A new way of sewing, carrying, storing, building, or organising work can spread within a generation. Bodies do not need thousands of years to grow a new insulating layer if people discover how to make a better garment. Culture allows humans to borrow solutions from one another instead of waiting patiently for natural selection. This flexibility becomes especially important during periods when climate changes rapidly. A familiar animal may move away, snowfall patterns may alter, vegetation can shift, a once reliable campsite may become less useful. Communities that depend completely on one rigid strategy are vulnerable, while groups capable of changing tools, routes, diet, and social arrangements possess more options. Mainstream archaeological evidence shows considerable innovation during later prehistory, with changing tool traditions, hunting technologies, ornaments, shelters, and material networks appearing across different regions. These developments are not a simple march from primitive to advanced. Technologies disappear, reappear, vary locally, and respond to changing needs. Human adaptation is more like a branching network than a straight road. Exchange between groups can enlarge that network. People meeting neighbouring communities may trade materials, form partnerships, share techniques, and transmit information about distant landscapes. A useful idea does not have to be invented independently in every valley. Social contact allows knowledge to move beyond the boundaries of one camp. Scholars still argue whether increasingly complex social networks played a decisive role in helping modern humans endure harsh and unstable climates, particularly when comparing them with other human groups such as Neanderthals. Some researchers emphasize wider exchange networks and demographic connections, while others caution that Neanderthals also possessed substantial technical skill and social intelligence. The archaeological evidence supports complexity on all sides and resists simple stories about one population being clever, while another somehow forgot to be. You can appreciate that uncertainty without losing sight of the broader pattern. Several kinds of humans survive severe cold for extraordinary stretches of time. Neanderthals endured repeated glacial conditions across Europe and Western Asia. Modern humans later inhabited enormous northern territories and developed increasingly diverse adaptations. Neither achievement belongs to creatures incapable of careful planning. The strength of these people lies partly in redundancy. If one food source fails, another may exist. If one tool breaks, another can be produced. If one individual is injured, others can compensate. If one location becomes poor, movement remains possible. A system with several solutions is more resilient than one relying on a single perfect answer. You notice how different survival looks when viewed this way. It is not one astonishing invention suddenly defeating winter. There is no prehistoric moment when someone raises a miraculous object and announces that snow has officially been cancelled. Instead, dozens of modest practices overlap until together they become powerful. Memory contributes one layer, technical skill contributes another, social trust adds another. Observation, patience, flexibility, and restraint fill the gaps. None seem spectacular alone, combined. They create a way of life capable of enduring conditions that an isolated, unprepared person could survive only briefly. Oddly enough, some of humanity's greatest strengths emerge from amphibious weaknesses. Because humans lack natural armor against cold, they must make protection. Because children remain dependent for many years, communities invest heavily in teaching and care. Because one person cannot master every danger alone, people share work and information. Vulnerability encourages cooperation, and cooperation becomes strength. The snowy landscape also places limits on what people can control. A storm cannot be negotiated with. An animal cannot be ordered to appear. A changing season does not care about anyone's plans. Ancient humans succeed not by controlling nature completely, but by responding intelligently to uncertainty. This may be the most enduring lesson hidden inside prehistoric winter survival. Adaptability is not the ability to predict everything correctly, it is the ability to recover when predictions fail, a route becomes blocked, so another route is chosen, a tool breaks, so it is repaired or replaced, conditions worsen, so plans change. You look toward the horizon as weak sunlight begins touching the highest ridges. Tiny crystals in the snow catch the light and briefly sparkle. Human tracks appear again near the camp, first as shallow marks and then as a growing path. Someone carries equipment, someone checks the surrounding terrain, life resumes through ordinary action. There is no triumphal music, only the crunch of feet and the distant movement of wind through trees. That simplicity feels appropriate. Ancient survival is built from practical habits repeated so often that they become almost invisible. The people who perform them may not consider themselves heroic at all. They simply know what must be done. The deeper achievement is continuity. Knowledge learned by one generation reaches another. Techniques improve, disappear, return and change. Communities endure enough difficult seasons for children to become teachers themselves. Every successful winter preserves not only bodies but information. And that information slowly becomes a human inheritance, not one universal manual, but the set of local traditions shaped by different landscapes and climates. Each community learns its own winter, its own animals, its own terrain, its own useful materials. Adaptation remains flexible because humanity itself remains varied. The pale morning brightens, and you can almost feel the frozen world loosening its grip by the smallest degree. Nothing about the landscape promises safety forever. Another storm will eventually gather somewhere beyond the hills, yet human beings will meet it carrying more than tools in their hands. They carry memory, experience, companionship, and the accumulated solutions of countless ordinary lives. That is how a creature seemingly designed for mild weather becomes capable of inhabiting extraordinary cold, not through invulnerability, but through the quieter and more powerful ability to learn. And now the landscape grows still again. The distant ridges soften into pale shapes. The hard glitter of snow becomes gentler beneath the rising light, and the sounds around you seem to drift farther away. You no longer need to follow every footprint or watch every cloud. The ancient camp settles into its own rhythm, secure for this quiet moment, while faint smoke rises and disappears into the cold morning air. You can allow the details to blur now, letting stone, fur, voices, and footprints fade together into one calm winter scene. The people continue their lives without needing your attention, carrying their knowledge into days you do not have to witness. Your breathing can become slower, your thoughts lighter, while the frozen horizon loses its sharp edges. There is warmth somewhere within that distant human circle, steady and small, and there is nothing more you need to do tonight except let the white landscape grow quiet and drift gently out of view. Sweet dreams.